Recording has begun. Morning, everyone. Morning. Yes. My name is Ana Silvia Avendaño Curiel. I serve as the Equity Policy Advisor here at the City Manager's Office. And I was asked by Natalie and Val to come and spend some time with you. Thank you for how you serve, really, thank you. I know for us, staff time, this is our paid time. But for you, you're really taking time out of your day to be here for this very important conversation. So we all really appreciate your time. So some introductions and kind of setting up some logistics that I'll let Meredith talk real quick on this.
Yes, real
And then we'll
quickly,
come back.
the black topped pots in back are both caffeinated coffee and housekeeping. The west wall back here has 2 restrooms.
Thank
you. And this store will not lock. These front 2 front 2 doors will lock, but this back one, you can come and go.
Perfect. Thank you. So we'll do some quick intros and hence the M&Ms. So our goal is to really just connect with one another, understand the work that we are doing. And so if you can pull up the presentation, Veronica, please, thank you so much. We will talk about, and if you can keep it within a 30-second, maybe 1-minute window so that we have enough time for everybody. Share your name, your pronouns if you like, the communities that you are a part of. And I'll model this for you. And then 2 of your M&M colors. And how you're gonna decide that, if you want to do next slide, please. One more. Gracias. So with your intros, you're gonna choose whatever color you want of your M&Ms. And you can choose to share any of these. So if you have a green and you choose to share a green one, you're sharing the green one as the most memorable childhood pastime. Etc. So let me pick some. For me, so Ana Silvia Avendaño Curiel. I am the communities I am a part of. I'm a 4th generation immigrant from Mexico City. And so I'm part of the immigrant community. I'm also a professional dancer in Denver. We just had a really cool shooting yesterday or photo session and about a Chicano life because we're going to be performing a piece at Ellie Hawkins Opera House in there. So that was something that as part of my community really fills me. Favorite pastime. I remember just in Puebla or in the lake, sort of a small town outside of Mexico City, Tlaxcala, where my grandma was from, going to the rancho outdoors and just grabbing a stick and hitting rocks with it and just spending hours and hours and hours at a time. And then something that I'm looking forward to this summer, actually, I don't have a blue one. See, okay. Something that brings me joy, I have 3 children, 13, 11, and 7. They are biracial. And I am really enjoying them watching them push those boundaries with me. Like really figuring out where they're at and who they are and how they are becoming their own. And sometimes it's fun and sometimes I'm like, don't do that. I think I need to let you do that. So that's me. I'll pass it over to Teresa.
Hi, everybody. I'm Teresa Taylor Tate. Do we have a list? I forgot what I'm supposed, communities, my pronouns, she, her, ea. Communities that I'm a part of, I'm an attorney, I'm a parent, I am Latina. And I'm part of the LGBTQ community. And I would say, let's see, favorite book or podcast. It's a little trite, but To Kill a Mockingbird is my favorite book. And I'm gonna go with red, something that brings me joy. A really well organized closet. It brings me pages.
I'm Janet Nichols. I'm also with the City Attorney's Office. I'm the primary attorney for the Transportation Advisory Board and transportation and mobility staff. He, she, her pronouns. I'm a member also of the parental community, the attorneys, LGBTQ community, and just the community of Boulder. I've been here for a long time. Let's see. So my colors are three most memorable childhood pastimes. One is having a yellow Stingray bike with a sparkly banana seat.
Nice.
And having complete freedom to ride around in my little town that I grew up in, wherever I wanted to ride with no cares. So that's my yellow. And in terms of favorite books, it's always the one that I'm reading at the time. And I'm reading Ruth Reichel's Save Me the Plums. And it's just a really fun read. She was the Gourmet magazine editor-in-chief, and they stole her away from the New York Times and from the LA Times. It's just a fun, mindless read, which is kind of nice after we do the work that we do during the day.
Yeah. Thank you, Janet. Welcome, Jen. We're so glad you're here. We just got started, so you're right on time. Blessings.
Yeah.
We are doing some quick intros and Tila will go next and we can let you settle.
Yeah, so we gotta get the good deal, yeah.
Introductions, our pronouns if you like, and then the communities you're a part of. And then your M&Ms are there for you to pick two colors and then to share any of these. So we'll go Tila.
Tila Duhane, she, her pronouns. I am a lawyer, but not really part of the lawyer community. I like the being part of the Boulder community. I definitely feel like I'm a part of this community. I would say I'm part of the sort of neurodivergent special needs parent community, which is a very different kind of group. But that's often top of mind. And of course, I'm a cyclist here, both recreational and just sort of get around town. So that's a fun little community as well. I'm also part of a sort of I'm a singer, not professional, but with Boulder Chorale, and so that's actually one of the little, things that is another little subset of groups and activities. And as a part of that, I've kind of inadvertently turned into a bit of a supporter of the arts. So we tend to host visiting artists at my home here in Boulder, and then I have a vacation home in Fruita, and it's a converted church, and it's actually become an art incubator there. So we host a month-long residency for 4 artists every year. We do all kinds of fundraising events for the local artist community, and that's been a really interesting kind of development lately. Yeah, pretty cool. Mostly visual arts, not so much performing arts, but we have hosted live performances as well. People written their own music, and it's a terrific artist community out there in Fruita. Check it out. Yes. Read something that brings me joy. Octopus. I love octopus. And so if a t-shirt has an octopus and a bicycle on it, I probably own it. Biking, does it too, but octopus is really kind of my thing. And Orange, this podcast, I don't really listen to podcasts very much. I usually do more audiobooks, and I have no favorites, but one podcast that has really drawn me in this last year, I think it's called Ear Hustle. Yeah, fantastic. And it's a woman and a man. He was incarcerated at
San Jacinto.
San
Quentin.
There you go, San Quentin Prison in Northern California. And she was like the librarian. She would come in and do some literary, programs with the inmates, that they got to know each other. And it's this podcast of them having discussions about what different things are like in prison and out of prison. He's now out. When they started the podcast, he was still in. You have guests, they go to women's prison. It's fascinating. It's really terrific.
Ear hustle, like eavesdropping, ear hustle.
Yeah, thanks. Ear hustle. Very cool. Thank you. Yeah.
Jen, did you ready to go or do you want to come back?
You can go ahead. I have horrible eyesight, so, but I'll just go with whatever I can tell. I'm Jen Oaks. I am part of she, her pronouns. The disability community in Boulder probably would be my community. I don't work, I live off of a disability, so that's why I have to rely on buses and all. I have a very limited income. But yeah, I love rhinos. Rhinos are my job. There's a rhino t-shirt I have. And podcast lately I've been listening to I love true crime, but morbid. I've really been enjoying that. It's two like 27-year-old girls, and you can tell they're 27-year-old. They do tell morbid true crime stories, so I enjoy that.
Nice. You're like my partner who watches those right before going to bed. No, I need to watch a Disney movie after. Yeah. Same. Thank you, Jen. Good to see you. Darcy?
I am Darcy Kitching, she, her pronouns, and the communities I'm part of, let's see, so I also have a child on the spectrum. And I'm a walker, pedestrian advocate. And this really showed up this weekend because I hosted the first half of our Walk 360 Slow Marathon. We did half a marathon on Saturday, which was awesome with 40 people, which was so great. We had our crowd show up. It was fantastic. Yeah, it was super good. So that's what I mean. I design and lead community walking events. That's what I've been doing for 10 years. So it's been really fun. And yeah, so parent and I mean, I have a lot of, I don't know, I guess those are my two kind of distinct communities. I think I'm part of a lot of things. But, I'm part of the business community through my work with the Boulder Chamber. So green, and I'll do a green one. My most memorable childhood pastime is visiting my grandparents on the Grand Lake of the Cherokees in Oklahoma and water skiing. And I so wish that my son had access to that, but we don't, you know, his grandparents are in cities and he's having other experiences, but that was my most memorable pastime, was water skiing on the Grand Lake of the Cherokees. And something that brings me joy. So my son is continuing, it's kind of silly to say graduating from fifth grade, but he's continuing from fifth grade this week. And it brought me so much incredible joy. He has found theater as a favorite thing. And he had a starring role in the fifth grade musical, and he is still getting accolades for his performance. People are like, wow, he was amazing, you know, so it brings me so much joy to see him doing that, enjoying it, and really getting a lot of positive attention for that. So, yeah. You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm Mike Mills, he, him pronouns. I'm a gay man with the history of activism in the LGBTQ community going back to the 90s and aughties when needed more activism. And I'm a member of Community Cycles Advocacy Committee and Boulder Progressives. Something that brings me joy is gardening in my backyard. Last year I put in some raised beds, so I don't have to step on the gardening space. Those are working out well, and I have a drip irrigation system that worked while I was in Europe for 2 months after I retired last year. So happy about that. And then I don't have an orange, but I have a brown, which isn't on there, so I'm gonna call it orange.
Right.
Missing out the brown.
Sing out the brown. I'm gonna use brown as wild. Anyone.
I listen to a whole lot of podcasts and audiobooks. I guess one that I don't know if I enjoy it, but I always have to listen to podcasts, Amicus, which is Slate's podcast about the Supreme Court and the courts and the rule of law with Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern. And these days it's pretty depressing, but yeah, I always have to listen to it.
Okay, so I am Trini Fullerton, my pronouns are she, her. I am a part of the Zillion communities because through my kids, I have found that I find myself involved in. So first of all, I'm a parent of where we are a blended family. So when I met my husband, he had 2 kids and I had 3. We don't have any together, but they've grown up together as if they were, you know, so to me, I have 5 kids. We have one that is on the spectrum. He's high functioning, but he still needs assistance. He lives in Carbondale, so I've learned a ton in this past 13 years. And then I have another a child that's transitioning, so I'm part of the LGBTQ community through her. And I'm an advocate, I'm a crash survivor, and that has been probably the most resilient, that's made me the most resilient, my crash, surviving my crash, and understanding how grateful, like how lucky I am to have survived that and all the things that have come after that. It brings me great joy to raise awareness, and it sounds really like cliche, but it does to see change happening and people opening their minds and thinking in different ways and stepping outside of themselves and saying, oh, well, yeah, this is a good thing. Change is a good thing sometimes. Thank you. And that's it.
And I'm Valerie Watson with Transportation and Mobility, member of the parent community, like many in the room. I'm most certainly an urban planner, so part of that community and a multimodal enthusiast. I think my favorite book of all time has to be Dune. And something that brings me joy are the cottonwood trees along the St. Vrain River. I know, they're so pretty.
I'm so many comments about that. I guess that's what happens when you come from LA.
Yes.
Just like simple things. All right, I'm Natalie Stifler. Let's see, she, her, hers, communities, definitely parent. I have 3 little kids. I'm part of the LGBTQ community, Latina. Let's see, I consider myself like part of Boulder's like endurance community. I'm pretty still involved with that, even though I haven't like actually raced a triathlon in a while. And then, so I'm using my brown as a wild, and I was gonna do something I'm looking forward to this summer. I'm taking my kids like solo on a couple trips, which is my first time doing that, which I'm both like nervous and excited about. And orange, this is easy because I don't know that I have like a favorite book ever, but I just finished for book club a book called All Fours by Miranda July. It just came out like 3 days ago, and it was so good. And I already read it. So I did all weekend. Yeah, I highly recommend. Well, for like women in their mid-40s, 50s, it's like it's basically about menopause. So, but yeah, it's really. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Mary Reyes. I'm actually Natalie Stifler's executive assistant for anyone who I don't know. It's nice to meet you. I'm from a small border town in South Texas. I'm part of the Latina community. Kind of part of the bowling community that brings me joy. And something I'm looking forward to this summer. It's sort of Renfest season, and I really enjoy going to Colorado's Renfest, so it's definitely that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Meredith, and she, hers. I'm a parent and a grandparent and 7 grandkids, bring me mostly joy. All of that makes me more resilient.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ron Hassan. I'm a senior transportation engineer with the transportation operations team. I will be your technical host today. My pronouns are she, her, and I would say my community, I would consider myself in the jiu-jitsu community, so martial arts. And I will combine my blue and the green. My most memorable childhood pastime was going camping with my parents, and I'm excited to do that this summer.
Nice, very cool. Nice, well, welcome everyone, thank you. We get to know a little bit more about each other, that's how we build community, that's how we, so, when it is important to have conversations too. That we know where we come from, right, the filter in which we use to make decisions, and I think that's really important. We're gonna move into a section around the types use of power, so one of the things that we wanted to bring in kind of in the center of this conversation, which I will write first before I give you this handout. The right use of power, if you don't know it, the right use of power is an institute here in Boulder. that comes from the creation of Dr. Cedar Barstow, who is, she calls herself, she's a middle-aged white woman therapist, economically able or high income, where she created this framework around how do you use your power and the relationship that you have when in the context of therapy. And that has then morphed into how do you understand your power and the types of power that you have access to in the context of just then relationship and decision making, and whether it's a parent and child relationship, coworker, supervisor, supervisee, et cetera. One of the things that we want to talk about today, and before we do that, is some group norms. So keeping in mind what could come up as we have conversations, not just around power, but the things that we're bringing in for ourselves. And so I wanted to quickly cover what some of the group norms that for you feel like could be really helpful for us to keep in mind as we engage in conversation with one another today. And I'm just gonna kneel over here and put them down. So what might be those group norms that can either accentuate the connections and the dialogue that we'll get into?
Only one speaker, one time.
What else?
Great handwriting.
Is
I like your handwriting.
it? What do you need from each other?
Mutual respect.
Anything else? Let's sit down. Great one.
An open mind.
Open mind, I love that. Yeah. I'll pair that with curiosity. Right, having an open mind, being able to also dive into, I wonder what this perspective is shaping for someone saying. Well, or anybody, any ideas from staff?
Schedule.
Yeah, we're already off schedule. Yeah.
That's a good.
A time management.
Yeah, being on time is
Being
important.
on time, yeah. Being respectful of everybody's time, awesome. And these are not solid, we can add to them as we see fit. But these are just something that as we manage sort of the power dynamics that are in the room, really going back to these is always gonna be very helpful. I'm gonna pass around, and the city attorney's office is will look familiar to you. Because this training, we actually did a pilot, with city attorney's office to really understand what is the power that we bring. And so let me go through each of these at a very high level, because this is something that we're like to refer back to as we enter into dialogue with one another. So the types of power that there's 4 types of power that are relatively accessible to each of us. Personal power. So personal power is basically our birthright. The right to be treated with dignity and respect. The right to know that we have a voice, that we have a mind, and that we have the ability to always access that powers. For example, how I think about that is Nelson Mandela, right? Being incarcerated for 27 years, completely isolated, completely taken away from every part of his communities, his activism, right? Put in prison for so long, and yet was able to do so much of the transformation from within a prison cell, right? He had access to his personal power. We also have role power. So role power is going to be something we'll dive into more today. Role power is positional power. So the thing that you are given from a certain standpoint. So the fact that you are board members, the fact that some of us are staff, director level, director, city attorney's office, right, or city attorney versus myself as an advisor. Right, so role power is, it is separate from additional power, so it is an enhancer, if you will, to role power. And should not be seen as within the individual, sort of separate, because we work within the same sphere, right? We are both accessing role power and personal power. To give you an example, I had a really hard time coming from a blended family. And now having we call him our bonus parent. My children get to have a bonus parent. And going home and me still making decisions of all the things, and him being like, what about me? What about my decision making? Like, where can I parent? Right? And so being able to give him some of that role power as a bonus parent in my household was really important. So you can think about how those can be assigned. Status power is additional power that is culturally conferred. So what does that mean? It often goes unrecognized by those who have it. Status power can be the areas of what we would call it privilege, right? The areas in which we know that if I am walking into this building as an able-bodied person, I don't have to think about how I'm going to open the door, right? As an immigrant individual coming to the United States, having documentation is a huge amount of status power. I just knew I never really had to fear the potential of getting deported at any point. And so that's status power. I often wouldn't see it or wouldn't accept it as a status power, but it is something that is there. It's always present. All of these, we end up leading to the collective power. So collective power is power that comes from gathering personal role and status power from multiple sources to affect change towards a common interest. So if you can think of these as sort of like a Venn diagram, that personal power, role power, status power is their own circles, but there will always be some sort of intersection, which then would lead to collective power. The really huge thing about collective power is, we'll also dive into some of that today, and my understanding is, how do we want to frame our conversation around the level of influence that as a board you can have and want to have with council, whether that is how much of that collective power is actually available to you. It necessitates collaboration and is centered on shared values. So it is not about my personal power, role power, and status power being more important than yours. Is actually having an awareness of all of that together to be able to create that collective power. And then systemic power is not really something that you cannot jump from your personal power to affect systemic power. Systemic power is larger. Systemic power is within all of the institutions that we engage with on a daily basis, the educational system, the medical system, the transportation system, right? You need to have a mixture of, I wish I had the diagram. So personal, role, and status power, that all comes together to create collective power. The collective power is what gives change and transformation to systemic power. Some of what we have seen through the ages, right? And some of what Mike, you explained earlier, being part of the activist community. The reason why I get to do the work that I do here for the city as an equity policy advisor is understanding that I am standing on the shoulder of giants and generations of people before me in this community, in the state, and across the nation that have done the work so that we can pass it on to next generations, right? I'm gonna pause there for a second and I'm gonna just check in. How is this landing? Any questions, any reflections on these types of power? What's coming up for you?
One reflection that I have of like on the status power, but the culture of preferred, and I'm not really sure like between that and systemic power, because it's sort of the cultural system that's giving the taking away. I don't know. So for systemic power, what really popped up when you were talking about it was like, oh, look, like the prison system as well, you know? I have a couple of family members who are formerly incarcerated. But like the lack of criminal history is a status power. One of those unrecognized, you don't have it, like you were talking about, like I have documentation, I'm not risking this kind of stuff. And so I don't know, I'd just like to understand a little bit more about the systemic, like, because that seems like all of the others are things that we have and we can do, and the systemic power is like stuff that's we're subject to, and so I'm not sure how that fits really into the
Yeah.
framework.
That's interesting. Can I respond?
Please, please.
It's interesting that you thought of it that way, like, I think, I thought of it as like, oh, to be able to affect change in systemic power systems, you have to have collective power to get there. But I think you're right, like, it's like kind of pushing in both directions, right? Like, there's the like longtime systemic power institutions that are present and pushing, and we're probably, you know, in some of our work and communities pushing against that.
Sure.
But you have to have collective power to do that, I guess.
So like what you said, just like, you know,
Yeah.
for all this work, you know, that Mike's been doing for
Yeah.
decades, right? LGBTQ, and that has changed sort of what systemic power is sort of.
Yeah.
But is it? I mean,
Right.
Florida is like, wow.
Yeah. Yes, and there will always be that tension within a systemic power in which we function. You do need to have all of the three, and thank you for sharing that. That's exactly what I would say. The other thing that I would add to that is people make up the system. People make up the institutions. We are part of an institution. So the policies that I end up reviewing and giving feedback, the policies, laws, right, the city attorneys gives legal feedback onto council that end up getting passed and that end up affecting the Boulder community. That's systemic power. So the reason that this is sort of the ethical imperative of making sure that we are always aware of the power, because we have the ability to affect collective power, influence it, influence one another, and then because of that, be able to actually create the system. Within this equity world, you will often, I think, hear is, oh, the system is broken, the system is broken. In my opinion, it's like, system is not broken, system has been designing, it's working the way it was been designed from the very beginning. How was that designed? Through personal power and status power. It was white men, like, leading and setting up the foundations and the standards for how we functioned and how our system functioned from the very beginning. So now being aware of this allows us to think through different ways of engaging with one another in a different way. Not necessarily, well, sometimes better, sometimes it's a new vision.
That's a parallel to transportation, because the system has been designed around, like, around the car. And it's completely car centric, and so I think now people are starting to open up their minds and change is happening, but we have to go back and fix.
Yeah, yeah. When I remember when we first immigrated, for sure, we got lost on the bus. It's like, you can't get off, like in Mexico, right? In Mexico, you get on the bus, right? Like, hey, stop right here. And you would just let off. Here is like, you gotta wait. And I remember my mother freaking out. We had to walk back 45 minutes.
Oh.
And that, to be perfectly honest, that put such a sour mouth on me as a child. And never took the transportation system again until my children were at school. And I was getting out of debt and I had to, because I couldn't afford car. So, right, the way, so also culturally, we're asking people when they come to this country, sort of shift, or even there are some areas too where New York or Chicago, there is that infrastructure, but it's only within the city. Nothing really extends outward like that. Is that? Any other,
I just want to point out that system power, like in the advocacy world, we talk about systems advocacy. That's how with any cause you have to get things made. You have to go to the system advocacy. So I think that is what stands out when I see this. I'm like, you know, it's very similar, because many different causes that we have to go to the system to fix all these different things.
Yep, absolutely.
I with our collective power, we can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else? So what I will hand out is something for you to not for you to review right now, but just to pass it around. You'll get a chance to do some of the parameters during your lunch, so it'll be a working lunch. So that we can try to catch up on time. But this is talking about the role power difference. Now, everybody, I'm sorry, Jen. Everybody has power, right? Now, we are going to talk about in situations where some individuals have up power roles or down power roles. So the most important lesson to learn about this is, you know, to the next slide. Please, thank you, Veronica. When we talk about up role power, it means that, for example, as a parent, I have up role power because I'm a parent, because right now all my children are under the age of 18. There's gonna be a point in my life where that's gonna flip. They might have more up power role and I will have down power role, because at some point they might be in charge of taking care of myself or deciding my care, right, as I age. One important thing to always know about this, and if there's anything you get out of this, is this. Down power role doesn't not mean no power. It is not an equal. People in down power role will still have access to their personal power, possibly role power and even status power. So as a board members, there might be moments where you might feel like you are down power role because you're not staff. Right? There might be some decision making that you might not be able to influence at the same level that maybe staff can. And so also the thing that happens with up power role, for example, as staff, we may then have a greater ability or a greater accountability. And so more eyes, right? There's a greater sense of bringing you sort of to the middle of the room and saying, well, why has the city done this way? Or why has staff taken these kind of decisions? And that's valid. And that is something important that often down power role folks bring to the table, like that perspective. So we'll walk through this in a little bit, but I want to make sure we move on to the next, if we're good. Anything else before we move on? Okay. Great. Now we'll go to the rules and procedures.
Okay.
And I'll pass it over to Sheila. Do you need to write anything down, or we need to keep notes on anything? Okay. If you need me, I'm here.
So as part of the materials tab that you were sent on Friday. Oh, this is good. It's all. Was a draft policies and procedures document that we worked on a couple of years ago together. And it was modeled after the existing adopted policies and procedures from the planning board. I think we took it from, there was a draft kind of done.
Well, it was the transportation ones. They were just never like finalized or signed.
Okay.
And they were about 20 years old.
Yeah, they were about 20 years
Yeah.
old. And so this is when Erica Vandenbrand was the director, and Natalie was in on the process because you were deputy director at the time. And there were, I think this was my first year as chair. So some differences of opinion about what got on and off the schedule and the agenda, and it wasn't at all clear. And so at that time there was renewed interest in sort of clearing all of this up. And so that's where this draft came from. And we worked on it for several months, and I had several meetings with Natalie and Erica, and it got presented a couple of times to TAB to look at and think about. And we never actually went through with the adoption. I think that there was just no real interest by that current TAB to work on it. So we kind of left it there. Now that Natalie has gotten her feet under her as director for a bit. She raised with me, and I thought it was a good idea that we would maybe revisit looking at that and consider whether. I mean, it's hard for you to know the three new ones because you've been to one meeting now. A new meeting now. To see whether we thought that might clarify how to go forward as a board. You know, it's kind of interesting. I think that transportation is a pretty critical board for the city. So it's interesting to me that it hasn't been formalized. I think there's a lot of, right now, we're functioning pretty well, and I think Alex's term went pretty smoothly, and so there was less of that friction that led to this kind of, but things change, chairs change, opinions change. And it might, and some of these are just like codifying, you know, how you run a meeting, which is already sort of implicit, but I wanted to sort of raise this with the board because it would be up to us to adopt our own policies and procedures. By no means is this a finished draft that you have to be, you know, adopting wholesale. If you have opinions on whether it should be changed, modified, whether it's a good idea or not a good idea, not necessary. I'm open to that, but this is maybe one thing I could tie up before my term ends. If you had any interest. And so I just kind of wanted to raise it. And I also wanted to hear from, I'm so glad you guys were here earlier. Because I wanted to actually see if you had any input about, you know, why we might want to pursue this. Adopt it, what's missing if we don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Taylor.
Yes.
This is Janet with the City Attorney's Office. I think it's a good idea for the boards to have particularized rules of procedure for your board, because every board is a little bit different, and without rules of procedure, well, we do have rules of procedure, Natalie, weren't they like 2004? But I don't think that they're widely circulated. Those are the ones, yeah, that we use this as test free from the
Okay.
board. And I don't think that they were really utilized, and I think that in all frankness, one of the reasons that we thought it was a good idea, or that staff thought it was a good idea, is because there were some questions about practices that the board had that we thought would be better put in some kind of a procedural framework. And so those are addressed throughout, and maybe those issues have been resolved. But we know that they have been issues in the past. And so it's helpful to have a document that helps guide us through that.
Yeah, and
Oh, go ahead.
from my perspective, it's another document that helps remind you of the scope of your work. Right? And because the scope of your ambition might not be the exact same as the scope of your authority and work.
Yeah.
Good luck. Yeah, and I'll add from like the staff liaisons perspective, I think it just makes the monthly interaction between board members and staff just go more smoothly. It becomes a bit more like, once these are kind of our operating norms, it just makes it easier to figure out, you know, because sometimes every now and then a question comes up like, well, what is an informational packet item? And because each board really does kind of operate differently in this way, like some boards have info items, some boards don't, right? So just those little nuances about tab, I think are important to include here, and how we, you know, what's kind of our agenda item order and what items are, you know, appropriate, what comes forward, where does that live? How does the director and the chair decide on what items can come forward? So all of those just kind of operating procedures, this helps to me just create that, you know, guidance around making it easier to operate together on a month-to-month basis. So that's why I think it's important, and but certainly it would be good for the whole board and all the members to take a look and provide feedback, because at this point, really just Valerie, Tila, Janet, and I had looked at this, so. Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have any feedback, any thoughts, any opinions.
For the group, if there are specific sections that you wanna start with diving into?
Well, maybe this will segue into the other part that I think the city attorney's office wanted to raise with us, but a lot about the interactions between board and staff are in here. And I think also one of the things that kind of happened around the same time was that we started having the information items and information packets as opposed to it was like kind of a third flavor of things that gets on the agenda.
Yeah.
I think what I think this doesn't quite clear up for me is when does it get on the agenda versus not on the agenda?
Yeah.
Like non-agenda items, so like, oh, okay.
Right, yeah, yeah, I think that's a good point. Do you want me to speak to that a little bit? Okay.
Please.
So, sorry, I was.
Okay.
I'm not realizing that I was.
So I think what we typically do is if there's something that we want to share with the board that's really just, sometimes it's like a community vitality item or an open space item that has some impact on transportation, but doesn't necessarily need your feedback at the time. But we want you to be aware of it. That's when we really use information item. We've also been using a lot with airport, like as things are kind of happening with the airport, that we don't necessarily need input on, but it's something that you should be aware of. We're putting that in as an info item. So that's really where, is there another like example of where you can think of info items come up for us?
Yeah, maybe things that are kind of going directly to council, and we want to make sure that you all have that information as well, but it's, there's not a stop along the way of tab.
Right, yeah. So that's really info items, and then there's what we use for kind of matters from staff items. Is this helpful, like for me to kind of, okay. So matters from staff items are usually more just, again, like a brief update that we feel like we should verbally share with you, and there may be even like, you may want to provide some comments back, but we're not looking for input to change the process, right? Because at this point, we're kind of moving forward and we're just sharing an update. But it's something that you may just want to be able to discuss amongst yourselves for a few minutes. And those are usually shorter items, that take 10, 15 minutes, usually under matters from staff. And then a full agenda item is usually where we're really seeking input or feedback or some type of action. So for example, with the CIP, right, like that's a really clear example. It's in your charter that you're providing feedback on the CIP. And so that comes forward as a full agenda item. Iris is obviously another one top of mind that will certainly come forward as a full agenda item because it's a SEEP. And you have to, per your charter, you need to take action on that. And so there will even be a public hearing associated with it, same with the CIP. So those are really like clear examples, I think, of full agenda items that are easy because they're called out in your charter. There's sometimes things kind of in the gray area that we feel like it's important kind of publicly on the record to get your input on. I can think of like probably the last time CV came with like an NPP related item, right? Or I guess it was a ramp full item, but NPP was part of that, residential access management program. So
And then
that
maybe is a neighborhood parking.
neighborhood parking permit program, yeah. So that was one where we actually came and like had a full discussion with you and you provided input on the record that was included in a packet item that went to council. Because it was important that we felt like it was important that TAB had like a public and discussion about that and provided input publicly. So do you have other thoughts to share on kind of the distinguishing between the different items?
Yeah, and Teal, I think your question was like, how do we decide
Right,
when those things are distinguished and then calendared?
right.
Yeah, so I think that's what those agenda setting meetings are for with the chair and vice chair is to really look at that advanced calendar and see what kind of flavor the items are starting to coalesce as. And then we make sure the timing works for, the needs of the project or the effort. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just remembering that, well, this is why the matters from staff is usually sort of the regional updates, like, oh, here's what the county is doing, here's the thing on, this, that, or there's, at the statewide level, this is what's happening, because we're merely advisory, we're just a little twinkle in the eye of that project, but it does, it should inform our thinking, when we're talking how does multi-use path, feed into this connection effort, and it's important that we are informed and know about, what's happening in the broader region. And things like we've had several updates to TAB as an agenda item, full agenda about like snow removal and, those processes. And it's not like we're voting on it or approving it, but it's important that we understand what goes into it. And actually, I think we've helped craft like the city's message to like out to the general public, because we're asking questions that get aired there and might only otherwise be answered one at a time to members of the public who bother to write in. Mike, yes.
Natalie, you mentioned our charter. Is that the document?
Oh, yes. And Janet and Teresa will definitely talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just add a little something? I think all of the information items are really vital context for everything that we need to think about. Because I mean, the nature of transportation is that everything is so connected, right, across from one project to another and how everything relates to each other. And so I find it really important to have that context about everything that's going on, regardless of whether we weigh in on it or not. It's really important to have that information. So, yeah.
Yeah, so the information packages in here, in the draft, I'm looking at it again for a while. Board members are expected to review the materials in advance of the meeting. That's true for all of our materials. But in particular for information package items, it's kind of important because if you have questions and they only come up at the meeting, we might not have an answer or a person involved who's able to answer, and that just slows everything down. And so you should be doing your homework anyway. You should be doing all of the reading, all of the all the reading all the time. But for information packets, it's actually a little bit more important because you might have clarification questions or, you know, other process questions about those, and we otherwise will not be expected to have a staff member, you know, able to bounce those off of.
Do you mean that we can request that a staff member?
Yes, so
can-
yes, so it would be super helpful if you ask in writing a couple of days before the meeting. Like, I'm gonna have questions on the information item. You can put out the questions if you want. Sometimes that's also very helpful.
Yeah.
But if you aren't ready to articulate them, then at least giving staff a heads up.
Gotcha.
For those items.
Yeah, that's good to know that we can
Yes.
request
Yeah,
more input if needed. Okay,
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
This is a good time to go into like how we communicate with each other in terms of open records law.
this is an excellent time.
We send those messages. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can move past this. So like I said, I think our plan was, you know, please read this through, think about it. I'm looking like the numbers are off. So I'm like, I think this is 2 drafts ago. I'll see if I have a more current one on my computer because I might. And just like compare them. And then, so I'll revisit this with you all in a couple of months, probably. I think if we do decide to proceed with adopting it, I think doing so before the end of the year would be a fine thing to do. So I just wanted to raise that with you, but if we're ready to move on to broader,
I mean, is that part of these rules?
there, yeah.
Okay.
All right, are we moving on to?
Let's move on.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Thank you.
So, good morning. Thank you so much for having us. Janet is your primary contact and you are in extremely capable hands with Janet. I really am here for support, and to tag team things, you know, happy to talk really about whatever questions you have. Certainly open meetings would be appropriate, scope of authority. You know, we'll go over a little bit the guiding principles for interactions. Some of you just got this recently in your packet, some of you got it a couple of years back. So we'll just kind of do a little refresher on that. But happy to start, Mike, with some conversation because this is really important and where boards get tripped up is communication among yourselves and what is permissible under the Colorado Open Meetings Law and what is not permissible.
Can I just ask a quick question? Have the new members, have you all done your board orientation meetings? Yes.
Yeah, Mike you went to the session, the Wednesday night session, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we
I was
covered
in
some of
person
this, I was virtual, but you all were in person and you indulged me and let me be virtual that night.
Memory
Me too, it's okay. I was there.
Time to review that.
So maybe we can start with the framework.
was out of town.
And then you can ask some specific questions, okay? So a framework is this, if you, substantive conversations need to happen in public. The open meetings law is a sunshine law, so to shed light on the process, I think about Hamilton, right? I want to be in the room where it happens. The public wants to be in the room where it happens. And in fact, they so want that they've codified it and it is the law. And so all of our government decision-making should happen in public. What does that mean for you? That means that you can communicate with each other one at a time and about your particular views. You can't communicate with 3 of you at a time because that becomes an open meeting. And so one of the cautions I'll give you is about replying all to emails. That's a way people get tripped up very easily. So you don't want to reply all to emails that come to you, say, for example, and we try to BCC you often, but you don't want to reply all to an email that comes to you from staff, giving you information. You can reply individually to staff, and you can talk to each other individually about it, but you can't talk as a group.
And that also applies to like emails from the public to us?
Agreed. So the public will email you all. I would not reply all. I would reply to the public member. And then tell me what your convention is. Do you include staff?
Generally, I think that's best just for our awareness to include me on it, and then I'll share it with staff as needed. Okay.
And that way too, if you have questions, right, maybe Darcy wants to know, did anyone reply to this? Yes.
Right.
Yeah, you can check, and staff will have sort of a mental running tally of like, yeah, someone replied. Because I think a lot of the email you get is one response is probably sufficient, right? But this applies to email, it applies to text messages, it applies to phone calls, it applies to coffee. If 3 of you want to go get coffee together and talk about your kids and talk about the shame of the Nuggets loss, feel free. Don't talk about business. Don't talk about city business. Yes.
Would that,
Go ahead.
sorry, would that apply, like, because we went to NACTO and it was really tricky because
Yeah.
4 out of the 5 tab members were there, so.
And tell me what that is.
It's
Yeah,
the national
conference.
conference.
Transportation.
Yeah, and so you can be there together, and this is a sort of a nuance on it. And I'll tell you the nuance, but then I'll tell you the bigger point that is important. So the nuance of this is, if someone else is hosting the meeting and you're not speaking, then you're probably not discussing city policy. So my caution to you would be careful when you're there together, because the temptation is to say, that was an amazing session, you know what we should do, X, Y, Z. You don't want to do that. I would invite you. It's not my meeting, but I would encourage you to think about, is there a time to debrief in a public meeting where you could share some ideas? So think about that. But the bigger point I want you to get here is there are some things that are different that you don't do every day, right? Like a national conference, like, you know, maybe Community Cycles is interested in having a meeting, and many of you are interested in going. Reach out to Janet. So when you have those kind of, anytime you have a question, but those unique circumstances, the law changes and it evolves. The answer we give you today is the best information we have at the time, but feel free to check in.
So when the IRIS plans were unveiled at that meeting at the school, at one point, Mike, Darcy, and I were all in the room. So this is hosted by, the city of Boulder. It's a transportation related thing. We are there interacting with members of the public. I stayed the hell away from you. I did talk to Mike. But I really wasn't sure at that moment. I'm like, okay,
So
I'm
my
leaving soon.
advice for that
Yes.
would be to just do a public notice. Because, so what's required
Was it
is,
publicly
it
noticed?
was publicly
yeah,
noticed.
It was, but not as a
public
meeting.
Yeah.
And I was there with sort of.
I would say best practice would be to notice it both ways. The tab will be there. The tab will be there.
Oh, I see.
And we're always learning, right? We're always learning. Now, here's the thing. At the end of the day, an open meetings violation is fixable. It's fixable. So it happens. I don't want it to happen. I prefer you not use it as an excuse. It's like, oh, well, it happens. But know that it's fixable. And the real risk here, and it's a big risk and it's an important risk, but the risk is that we lose public confidence in the transparency in government. And that's a big risk, right? And so if you keep that in the forefront, if your question to yourself always is, am I being as transparent as possible? Then you're usually in pretty good stead.
So it's just a question on that. So I work in transportation. And
Which is
and I
probably
have
too
dealings
qualified.
with staff as part of my work, and so that project in particular was important to me to go to that with my work perspective on. So I feel like I was there with that particular hat on.
Well, I think it's fine if you're talking to staff, you just other tab members, you have to.
Right,
Yeah.
and maybe we said hi to each other, but I don't even remember seeing you, so like, we.
I would deal with any tab.
It's hard when you wear
Yeah.
a couple of different
Yes.
hats. It is, and those are great times to seek advice from Janet.
Gotcha, okay.
About the different hats that you're wearing and a situation. I'm not at all saying or implying that you had a conflict of interest there. But when you work in the industry that you are advising about, you do want to be discussing conflict of interest with Janet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And is there anything you would add to this sort of open meetings, general discussion, Janet?
I think I would just reiterate that you don't want to talk about city business. I loved your example of being at the conference. You know, we ought to try that in Boulder and have that conversation. Keep your notes and then bring it up, put it on the agenda. You know, talk with Natalie and Tila about having it added to the agenda so that you can have a full discussion. But it's always best to err on the side of, we need to save this for a public meeting.
Sure, okay.
And then I want to warn you a little bit about something called a serial meeting. And a serial meeting happens when, when it's bad. And it's bad. You don't want, so a serial meeting is still a meeting, and we can't have a meeting unless it's noticed. And the public is invited to at least observe, right? So let's for a moment, so that I don't pick on you all, pretend that the three of us are TAB board members. And Anna Sylvia and I have a conversation about Iris and CAN. And Anna Sylvia shares her views with me and I share my views with her. So far, how are we doing on an open meetings law? Right, we're green light, we're fine. And then we hang up the phone and I call Janet. And I say, Janet, I want to talk to you about this Iris CAN newest development and what's going on with it. And Janet shares her views with me and I share my views with Janet. How are we doing?
Good.
Okay.
We're still okay, right? Because we're talking one-on-one about our personal views. And Anna Sylvia told me that what she thinks about this is,
Yeah, no.
stop right there. That's a serial meeting.
Mm.
That's a serial meeting. So we can't circumvent the open meetings law by having one-on-one conversations where we're relaying someone else's information. Because suddenly, if you count up the number of people in that conversation, it's me, Janet, and Anna Sylvia in the conversation, even though she's not there.
What about if Teal and I get together and we're talking about Iris and she shares with me her perspective and Darcy's perspective and Mike's perspective on the project? Is that fine?
That is fine,
Okay.
because she's speaking to a staff member. Mhm.
Going back to your example, if you call up Janet and one of the things you say is that you should talk to Anna Sylvia.
Appropriate.
Okay.
Referring to.
I think that you and Anna Sylvia should chat about your views on this.
Gotcha.
That's okay. That's okay. Yes.
Just not representing each other's.
Correct.
Yes, no passing notes.
So I'm
No
just-
passing.
I'm checking time.
Nothing we're gonna type.
And I think, right, to wrap it from what some of our discussion this morning, one, Darcy, that you made me think of the role power, right? Where are you stepping into a meeting?
Yeah.
And mentally is, okay, I'm in my job role power.
Right.
Whether, now, that doesn't mean that you're gonna filter things through you, the time that you invest in this board It may just not be verbal in that moment, or should be.
And you also have to be aware, like you are a public official every time you walk into that, it's
Yes.
doing things related.
Yeah.
And so, you know, even if, like, so the appearance of impropriety is an important thing as well.
I need to be very mindful.
Yeah.
Well, and, you know, the mayor asked me, what hat do you have on here? And I was like, that's a good question. I think I'm here as a chamber staff.
You just call it out loud yourself from the very beginning, so that you are not put in those awkward situations. Yeah, what role am I playing?
Yeah.
You're setting the standard for it.
And so hand in hand with the open meetings law is the open records law. So that's anything in writing, anything in writing. So that's a text. That's an email. Notes that you're writing to each other during meetings, texts that you're sending to, please don't text each other during meetings. Please.
No backdoor competitions.
Is it transparent? I mean, I come back to that question that you are asking yourself, right? Am I being as transparent as possible? So the Open Records Act requires that the city make public upon request any record, which is defined as a writing made, maintained, or kept for the purpose of basically doing city business. So again, I encourage you to pick up the phone with each other. That's a good way to communicate, right? Texts and emails, think to yourself, if this was on the front page of the Daily Camera above the fold, am I feeling pleased about that? Am I feeling like that's fine? And would Janet be thrilled? Would Janet and Teresa be thrilled? Excellent, right? So be careful, just be careful what you put in writing. And know that you can always talk.
Yeah, to another board member.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the notes that I'm taking in the middle of the meeting.
Correct.
For
That's,
myself, my
although,
records of my recollection of my follow-up.
although technically
Yeah.
the notes you take during a meeting are public records. So, there is not to my knowledge, there's not a retention schedule for those, so
No.
maintain or destroy those as you do. But if we were to ever come to you with a records request, if you had notes that you took during a meeting related to CAN and IRIS, and that was the records request, then you would want to turn those over to our office. And we will look at them and determine, do they fall within any kind of exception or not? And some things do. Conversations with Janet are gonna fall in an exception. We're gonna talk a little bit about attorney-client privilege in a bit, but some things do, but what we ask of you is that you turn everything over that fits what we ask for you, right? So if we say we need all communication, all writings and well, we'll pay attention, right? But all writings having to do with CAN and the IRIS phase of the project, then you're gonna look through everything you have and you're gonna turn it all over.
In 8 years, I've never received a request to do this. So,
It is exceedingly rare.
yes.
It's exceedingly rare.
Unless you're staff. Unless you're
Well, it happens a lot.
It happens every week.
Yeah, it happens to us a lot. I mean, truthfully, the public just doesn't think to ask about boards and commissions that often, but know that it's out there and it's important. And so I think next we want to transition to talk about, so, you know, we talked in boards and commissions training about general principles that are generally applicable to all boards and commissions. One of the things I mentioned there is that you want to be thinking about what is the scope of authority for your particular board? And so what is the scope of authority for the Transportation Advisory Board? And Janet is going to chat about that.
Thank you, Teresa. And Mike, this ties into your question. What is the city charter of which, or what is the town charter of what you speak, of which you speak? It's actually codified in the Boulder Revised Code at section 2-3-14. And when you have a chance to look at the materials that TILA sends you, your rules of procedure, that's one of the first items that's set forth in those. So in those procedural rules, it talks about what the scope is, what TAB is authorized to do. But I thought I'd use this opportunity to go over what's with you. So So TAB's responsibility, TAB is an advisor to city council, but also to the city manager. And generally, you're advising city manager through Natalie or through staff. And then sometimes even planning board, because there are some things within TAB's purview that you provide information to the planning board. What TAB doesn't get involved with is any review of the city's land use regulations unless you get a specific invitation from city council. And that's happened actually definitely within the last 12 months, where they say, we would really like to hear what TAB's perspective is on this planning zoning that we want to implement. And so when they've invited you to do that, invited TAB, then you can correspond with city council. You'll have that communication opportunity with city council to do a recommendation. We can get more into those technicalities. I mean, you have to take a vote, and that's in a little bit later on what your responsibilities are. The land use regulations, so if you see something that's happening with zoning, development standards, and that's like site access control, parking standards, public improvements, you might see a notice. There is a project that's under review right now that I am really interested in, and I, as a TAB member, think that we should make some adjustments to the park. You're invited to council. You're not going to provide that information to council as a TAB member.
Yeah, but you could go and.
You can go individually and speak. You identify, if you do want to speak on something that's not within the purview of TAB, you can correspond with city council, planning board, and say, I am doing this in my personal capacity. I am not representing the views of the Transportation Advisory Board, and then it's permissible to do that.
So what you said, it has to not be in the purview of TAB,
As a community member, you can show up as a community member and speak.
Exactly.
but you couldn't do that on something that is within the purview of TAB?
Different rules, and we'll talk about those with these guiding principles.
Right, so amongst the things that are within TAB's purview are the city transportation and environmental assessment, and then the CIP, the capital improvements. And there's guidance for these materials in something that's called the City Plans and Projects Handbook. It has been redacted. I think it was like 2003 when it was initially drafted, but it is current as of 2023. Adjustments have been made. It's 96 pages long, so I didn't print it out for you, but I'm happy, or Natalie, Valerie can provide you with a link to those. But those guidelines show what the process is for doing an environmental assessment, or for doing for considering capital improvements projects. So that is within TAB's purview. TAB reviews, monitors, and proposes changes to the transportation master plan. So I'll have to defer to Valerie and Natalie on when the last time was that the TMP was. 2019. So I don't know if you have regular updates planned, or, some boards, the Boulder Valley comp plan, they look at every 5 years, but do a major change up in 10 years. So I don't know where you are in the schedule.
So we're in a bit of a kind of like re-envisioning how we as departments have plans. There's definitely, we're definitely gonna be moving away from master plans. I imagine we will update our department transportation plan sometime in the next couple of years. The comp plan is really going to be our main focus over the next 2 years, and so potentially after that, we would see a transportation plan update. But the comp plan will be a very important plan that TAB is weighing in. I'm sure it'll be coming forward.
The Boulder Valley Comp.
The Boulder Valley Comp plan, yeah. But yeah, so we don't have a regular cadence anymore to department.
We get
plans.
passed for COVID.
Yeah. But I would say there are, like the transportation master plan currently has like a project map that gets amended through certain plan updates. So like the Transit Village Area Plan, you all saw that came, and I believe you took action when there was an amendment to the transportation master plan kind of project, the map of projects essentially. So there are moments when something is kind of triggered to update transportation projects or long-term transportation projects. I can think of even like sub-community plans, when PNDS is working on sub-community plans, that would trigger updates potentially to the transportation kind of map of projects. So those are they're I would say less regular than they used to be, because we just haven't been focusing. We've been focusing on getting stuff done, not really like updating plans right now the last several years. But there are moments in time where that does take up a little bit more bandwidth. Does that?
Does anybody have questions about the transportation master plan or the comp plan? And
Well, and the monitoring bit, so it's not just developing the master plan, but also the monitoring bit, and that's why we have been getting regular like reports on progress. Where traditionally we have disagreed with how staff has graded itself. Discussion about that. But that's something that I
Hopefully
think.
that's gonna change.
Yeah. It was better last year. It was better last year.
Yeah.
I have a question.
More honest, I think, last year. Yeah.
Where does ADA violations fit into the transportation? Yeah.
Well, I had to really defer to Natalie on the plan, but the city is required, obviously, to comply with the ADA, with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And when engineering new plans, that's always a consideration that staff takes and the staff's engineers take when they're proposing some kind of a new development. The city has on board an ADA coordinator with whom, yeah, exactly, with whom staff can coordinate.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything else about the ADA?
Yeah, so our ADA coordinators within the risk management office, which is under our finance arm, but we do work closely with them. Obviously on the project level, as Janet described, but we also have an ADA transition plan. And do you want to speak a little bit to that, Valerie, just our ADA transition plan and the way in which we kind of interface with our ADA coordinator on all of that?
Yeah, so the city's ADA coordinator is really creating a citywide ADA transition plan, which is a list of actions that different city departments can be taking. Our department, Transportation and Mobility, was a little bit ahead of the curve in that before 2019, the department had started to identify either some of those policies or actions that could be formalized for the department to influence future projects, programs. So that is now kind of resurrected in the work plan this year, and we'll be kind of formalizing that in tandem with the work going on at the citywide level.
Thank you.
Another item that's within the purview of the Transportation Advisory Board is to work with individual community members and with transportation and mobility staff regarding neighborhood traffic mitigation problems. It's something that's called out specifically. I think that funding is an issue for traffic mitigation in at least neighborhoods, but it is something that you can communicate with the neighborhood, with neighborhoods, with individuals or groups, and you can bring it back to the entire tab and to staff. And then of course, like most things, it's subject to funding and availability, but that's one of the responsibilities that's called out in the ordinance.
And I'll just add here, I think this was probably an amendment made to the charter when our probably the first iteration of the neighborhood speed management program was developed, which was not the most recent one that we paused, but the one before that, which was probably almost 15 years ago or something. I mean, it's been a while.
That's when the roundabouts went in on Pine.
Right.
Yeah, probably more than 15 years ago.
Yeah, so I think that's when this became part of the charter, and now, this is less of a thing because we just don't have a neighborhood traffic mitigation program right now. It's, you know, it's on the work plan, it's not funded. Obviously, our focus is on the arterials right now, though we are also doing neighborhood traffic mitigation as part of the CAN projects.
Thanks, Natalie. Another responsibility that's set forth in the charter or in the code is to advise city council and the planning board concerning alternate transportation programs and to track modal shift goals of the TMP. So it's an ongoing conversation. I believe the TAB has, you'll see it in your agenda from time to time. That is one of the responsibilities that the TAB has, is to advise those two boards, or the city council and the planning board.
And that one was what you were referencing, well, specifically it's called out, just the report on progress.
Right.
And we typically.
You know, she's describing it as something TAB does. I'm like, actually, staff does that for us.
Yeah, but it's like, it's good that it's in here because what it does is it essentially just makes it so that we are reporting on, you know, and evaluating our progress and then coming back and having conversation with the board on that. And that's TAB's opportunity to advise council, right? And say, you know, we're not on target, we're not meeting our goals. And so, yeah, but that's the report on progress. We typically try to do every 2 years. Sometimes it's more like 3. And we'll continue to do that. Even with just our current transportation plan, the metrics that we have in there have been longstanding metrics. And I don't imagine those will change.
Another responsibility that the Transportation Advisory Committee has is to review and to provide recommendations to the city manager, so that would be through staff generally, concerning policy issues on operating programs. So what we're talking about in the operating programs are things like traffic engineering, parking, new regulations for parking, alternative transportation, policies that would bring those areas to light. And that you advise the city manager. So that's something, I don't know if you put them on your regular agendas, but that's within TAB's purview is to look at those operating programs.
Yeah, I would say, these are, so when I think of like the Vision Zero Action Plan and not just a lot of the body of work within that. So, the most recent is we're doing PICTIC now, but before that we were doing the speed limit setting work, or I guess we're still maybe doing the speed limit setting work. But those are definitely more operational programs, right? That we're bringing for input from you on, and then obviously, you know, CV comes on parking matters, and then Chris Aglin and Allison kind of on the TDM side of the house. They're bringing items to you, but those are certainly like operating programs. They're not things that, you know, it's not like the CEP and the CIP where there's like formal action to be taken, but we recognize as part of your charter that there's an opportunity for you to review and provide input on. And so those things come forward to you, and usually as information or as actual agenda items.
TAB is charged with providing with making some recommendations to the city manager and to different to the planning board and to city council. You have to hold a public hearing before you make a recommendation. So you have a public hearing, you take information from the public and hear their feedback, get their feedback. TAB would take a vote on a recommendation, then you would take formal action. And we're taking formal action. Somebody will make a motion to take formal action on some proposal, and then you'll have a discussion and then you'll vote on it. So that is required. It's a little unusual. It's not in something I've seen with other boards and commissions that specifically require you to have a public hearing. But TAB does.
It's like TAB is special.
Yeah. It's special. And the last thing is that TAB isn't authorized to issue subpoenas. Some boards can if they've got quasi judicial powers, but TAB does not. So no subpoenas, not that you would need them for anything. But that's the charter. That's what's set forth in the Boulder Revised Code that City Council has determined are the processes and the scope of authority for the Transportation Advisory Board.
I think there's a catch-all, wasn't there? I mean, I'm not looking at the language right now, but it's like also on any transportation related matter.
Well, to whom do you, let me see, I'll go up my list. Let's see. On any transportation matter, except, you're right, it's in the very first one. TAB advises the city manager, the planning board, and the city council concerning any transportation matter except the land use regulations that are invited. So if you're going to provide this advice, you provide it to staff for the city manager. If you are presenting something to city council, some kind of, the TAB wants this council to be aware of this, you would first have a meeting and make sure that everybody is on the same page. You'd have a vote. And if there is if there's not alignment in the entire group, when you do make that recommendation to the city manager, planning board, city council, you're also supposed to give them the opposing side. So 3 members supported this, 2 members did not because whatever. So you want to be transparent with what the position is.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. So for instance, there's talk about a transportation demand management ordinance that's being developed or is discussed.
It's
right?
on the work plan.
Right, it's on the work plan. So if we decide to have a meeting and have a formal presentation to council about our position on that ordinance, this would be that kind of situation, right? Where we have, okay, because that would become law.
It would, and you'll also have an opportunity, so when an ordinance is put forward, it'll go to the Transportation Advisory Board first, because one of the things that staff reports to city council is what was the board and commission feedback. Did you miss? Right. That's right.
But a formal presentation to council would be at their invitation. Otherwise, it's the written materials that.
So if they
inform
say
council.
what, if they direct us to have that kind of presentation.
And you
Well, so-
also request,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
then staff would bring forward that request.
Yeah, so this would be like and because this is a work plan item, I think we've kind of thought through what it would look like. So the project is an update to the parking code and TDM. Because it's one project and because we know TAB's interest in parking, right? It'll come forward to TAB through the process at all of the kind of milestones before we eventually get to council for an adopted change. I imagine there'd probably be like a couple check-ins with TAB. The second to last one, before it goes to council we would get a formal recommendation. What will probably happen is we'll probably get a formal recommendation on both the parking and TDM ordinance changes from you all. Probably at the request of council on the parking piece of it, right? On the TDM, well, technically, we don't need to even get there. We don't even need to get council's, request for the parking piece, because that's within their charter to be able, it's not land use related. Well, would that fall under BRC? It's the land use regulations?
I'm gonna say it depends.
So that's a gray area that maybe we will want council to clearly say they want, which they will.
It has development implications.
Right. But no matter what, the TDM side will need your recommendation on, and then that will go to forward for an ordinance change to council. Does that clarify?
Yeah, and there's also been, so occasionally, there will be a proposal from staff and TAB will usually be like, yep, we're on the same page, that's fine, or more or less, cool. But occasionally we have real differences of opinion. And so I'm remembering when staff was, not wanting to, this is before Natalie was in charge, adopt the 20-mile-an-hour ordinance for the city. And TAB thought it was really important. Often on something like that where we disagree, we would just leave it to staff to say, TAB voted blah, 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 did not, support. But I think maybe I just called Aaron. And I'm like, I want to be able to actually talk about this, like we have a real difference of opinion that I want time on, when that comes to you.
Right.
And so I did, I spoke, and then there was another one that it was a rough year, but. So, yeah, so it happened twice in one year that Tab had really disagreed with the staff recommendation that was being presented to council sufficiently that we wanted to actually be able to have a person instead of just having staff reiterate what the tenor of the conversation was. For the most part, even when we disagree or don't strongly support what staff wants city council to sign off on, we'll usually just, leave it to staff to say, yeah, there was disagreement and,
Yeah.
Three board members voted in favor and 2 of them didn't, and we'll just kind of leave it there. But sometimes it requires more of a discussion, and I don't think we have a mechanism. It's definitely not like council inviting us.
It is.
Okay.
That's what happened.
So I called there and then Aaron invited me.
Exactly. So what happens is, just for your information, there's a council agenda committee.
Yeah.
And the council agenda committee sets the agenda for each council meeting. And so that's a place where if you, and I would recommend that you do it through the chair.
Yeah.
But where you through the chair have requested to be able to go to the meeting, then Aaron brings that forward to CAC and says, we've had a request from Tab to have some time as well. I've never seen a request like that denied.
Right.
But there is a formal process.
Okay.
That's good. Well, it's good to know that we can do that if we need to.
Mhm.
I have a question, and it's kind of like going back a little bit, and I'm sorry, I apologize, but it just like popped into my head. So we're constantly being invited to working groups as stakeholders in the community. And I can name a couple that Darcy and I are in, before yeah, and so I just wanted to know, like, I usually clarify, I'm very, very specific that I'm there representing like my nonprofit and not the city. But what happens when 3 of us are asked to be in a working group? Is that a problem?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
problem.
we can't do that.
So it can, all right.
Well, and in the case of Pig Tag, like I'm the designated tab person representative to that committee, and you are there as
It could
a
be,
committee, yeah.
but what if
and that's
Mike
it.
wasn't, like Mike as part of community cycles?
No.
Can't do that.
No?
Yeah.
All
But
right.
somebody else who's not on the.
Okay, sorry, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, if,
Hypothetical scenario.
Like we can choose 2 of us to show up.
Yes,
at
yeah.
the thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, so I want to talk with you a little bit about attorney-client privilege. I'm not going to pass these out yet. This is not attorney-client privilege. And I don't want to distract you with different material. So I touched on this in the orientation, but it bears repeating. So information you receive from the attorney's office is confidential. It's privileged. There's an attorney-client privilege. Our client is the city of Boulder. And so we represent the city of Boulder through the city council, through our boards and commissions, through our staff members. You will receive confidential legal advice now and then. You may not waive the attorney-client privilege. So what does that mean, to waive the attorney-client privilege? It means you can't disclose that confidential information to somebody else. And there's a sort of an interesting debate about whether this board could waive the privilege. My position is only city council can waive that privilege. Very seldom is there a reason to waive privilege. It would be a really unique circumstance, and we would work through that together if there was a reason to do that. But, so what that means is you don't forward on our emails. And these are all real life examples. So please don't forward our emails. I'm sure it was never Tab.
That we get continually reminded.
You don't want to say, our attorney said, our attorney said, but could you paraphrase? So if, for example, Janet gave you advice that something is permissible under the code, you could say, I understand that this is permissible under the code.
Yeah.
Did you check with your attorneys? What I'm telling you is that I understand that this is permissible under the code. So you can paraphrase, right? You can say what your understanding is, but what you don't want to do is pass along our confidential legal advice, Because what that means then is how we advised is public. And that could mean everything around that topic of advice. And so it's problematic. It's problematic. That's the same, not that they ever would, but if you get an email from staff where they're saying the attorneys are telling us, treat it as attorney-client privileged advice and please don't forward or disclose it. Janet, anything to add to that? Or clarifications or corrections even?
No, I think that that's accurate. I guess what I would do is invite questions. If anybody has questions about attorney-client privilege and sharing that outside of the city organization.
That's, so sharing it outside the city or organization. So I can tell Ryan Schuhart what you told me.
You can, please include us. Like if it's an email, please include us, because that's, again, it's an opportunity. So here's sort of what happens, right? The game of telephone happens, and sometimes our advice gets a little confused. Or there are nuances that maybe as attorneys, we appreciate some fine nuance, but we haven't made it clear to whoever we're advising that it's the nuance that makes this the situation. It's a particular fact that makes our legal advice XYZ. And if you change this little fact, our advice might be completely different. So can you share it within the organization? You can. The better practice would be to say, we've consulted the attorneys about this, and you should ask Janet what she said. Or you could even say, my understanding is XYZ. Number one, it's attorney-client privilege, so don't share it, Ryan. Right? Because the reminders that, oh, what you're hearing, even though you're hearing it from Tila, it's attorney information. And so that's the other risk we run when we pass it on that way, is that people don't sort of
know.
register that little fear that somehow comes to people when we're talking to them, like, oh, the attorneys are talking to us. So that's, does that answer that question?
I just want to make sure that was clear.
That's true, yeah. Just refer back to the source. Yeah.
Any other questions about attorney-client privilege?
So let's clarify, because your client is the city, if I have a problem, say, with a staff member, and I call you to complain, you're not actually looking out for my interests necessarily.
Well, this is a tricky example. So again, this is one of the situations where I'm like, the facts matter. So here, it would depend on how that complaint comes in. If you're looking to do a formal inquiry about a code of conduct issue, that's a big deal. And the city attorney's office is authorized under the code to look into potential code of conduct violations. That's typically not something we would recommend that as a first step, or even a second step. But we can also give you an advisory opinion about whether something might or might not be a code of conduct violation. But let's say you're calling to sort of say, like, I don't really think Natalie is hearing me, Janet, and can you help me? We're certainly gonna aid you, right? We're gonna go to Natalie and say, like, hey, there seems to be some disconnect. How can I help? How can I help? But are we looking out for TAB's legal interest? It depends, right?
Yeah.
TAB is a city board, and so we represent you as board members. We look out for your interest in that way. But we're always thinking about the bigger city picture and big city liability.
So an example of that might be like if we feel as if our recommendations or whatever were misrepresented to council. Is that an example of that? Okay.
That would,
By
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Not that that's.
Not that this.
Not that that will happen. I'd say that's an example that we could put up.
Oh, sorry, seeing my own doubts at the bottom.
I'm just gonna give us a quick time check, which
Yes.
we're perfectly fine. We have plenty of time till 11:45 and lunch is getting set.
Thank you. So we have 15 minutes, 14 minutes. I'm gonna keep us on track here. Punctuality matters a lot to me.
Yeah.
I'm an anxious person. I'm tied to the clock. So these guiding principles for interaction among council, boards, commissions, and staff members were part of your materials, but I know you got a lot of things, right? And so at the risk of, well, forgive me if you've already read this and you feel like, yeah, I got it. But we're just gonna go over it briefly. And so honestly, this is to help everybody set some expectations. And we're gonna start with sort of, what does council do? Well, as you know, they set city priorities and policies. And so in general, this advisory board does not set city policy and does not set priorities for the city or staff. That's council's role. But what council does want you to do, and this is clear, particularly because of your public hearings function, they want you to be the first step in gathering community feedback, particularly on those difficult and controversial issues. But giving them input about what are you hearing from the community? And you all are out in the community in these fields, recognized in ways that are helpful in terms of gathering that feedback. Certainly, if there is something on a national, international, statewide, or even county level that is of interest, and this can happen, those are for council to take a position on. It is not appropriate or permissible for a board to take a position on that, right? We would take one city position. What you can do, though, is suggest to council, and I would do this in a formal way, right? Through a resolution or a formal action, but suggest to council the policy position that this board would like to see. And so you may do that way. And then if you happen to be involved in something that's a quasi judicial matter, that's not going to happen often for you all, but more and more we're seeing things come through the planning board at the council, and council says, we'd like to know what TAB thinks about this. And so those are areas where it's really important that you not have one-on-one or outside conversations about this, because council is acting as a judge. And so when they're acting as the judge, we have to hear everything in a public setting. And so those are things that Janet can help remind you, this is quasi judicial in nature. That also goes for things that you have an opinion on that maybe haven't even come before the board. You're not going to want to be having interaction with council about those in ways that are not public. So what are some public ways you can do that? You can send an email that could be included in the packet. You can come to public hearing and speak during public hearing in your individual capacity. Or if you as a board have decided a position, you can represent that position. So those are sort of council's roles. Boards and commissions for you all, and this touches on what I was just talking about. So if you want to explain or advocate for a position to council, you're going to identify yourself as a board member, but you're going to clarify whether you're speaking in your individual capacity or on behalf of the board. And Janet mentioned this earlier, and I want to be really clear about something. You only speak on behalf of the board if the board has authorized you to do that. So it may be true that all board members agreed with a particular position, but if you're not authorized to go and represent that position on behalf of the board, that's not something you're going to want to do. So it's something you're thinking about in terms of process, right? Do we want to authorize somebody to go speak about this? As Janet mentioned, if you disagree about an issue, council wants to be apprised of what were each of the positions. And I think we typically do identify by person, but more than by person, what they're interested in is what was the split.
And what was the reason?
And what was the reason? So you'll want to be representing that, and we tend to represent that in minutes and in our formal actions. Budget. So the city manager is responsible for budget recommendations. Budget is not something that is within TAB's purview. if you were to have a thought or opinion about the budget, you could share those with the city manager. It would not be appropriate for you to go to city council about that. It would be appropriate for you to go to the city manager. And I frankly would encourage you to do that through Natalie. And if you do plan to address council as a matter of courtesy, you're gonna wanna let the city manager. And then city staff, this is an important one. So pursuant to our charter, which is, remember, the constitution of our city, pursuant to our charter, staff takes direction from the city manager, not from any board or commission, or even city council. So your authority is all derived from city council, right? City council said, these are a bunch of powers that we have, and here's something we want you to do on behalf of us. City council is, under the charter, is not permitted to direct staff. What does that look like? So, for example, if you're interested in, forgive me, I'm not going to be the best with transportation examples. I visited Florence, and I think they have an amazing transportation system, and I would like to know all about using waterways in the West as a means of transportation. Absurd example, but there it is, right? You can't direct staff to go look into that. You can't direct staff to go research that for you. If you have a small request that might require some research, that could be permissible. Natalie will sort of be the gatekeeper of that. But if it's more than a small amount, then actually it needs to come through council and be a request that council would make, technically of the city manager, right? But that would flow to the department.
So what does that look like? We would request it to the council and then council.
So here you would say, Tab has a great idea, waterways. Imagine it, waterway. Gondola. And then council will decide, is that something they want to take up at all? And if so, do they want to direct staff? And what level of direction do they want to give? Staff support city council, that is the first priority. I'm not saying that top isn't very important, you all are. Supporting council is all of our main priority, because that's in service to the body that is making the policy. They're going to use their very best professional judgment regarding issues and policies. And sometimes you all may not agree with those professional judgments, but I do ask that you come to this from a place of assuming good intent and assuming that you have a team of very skilled professionals who are exercising their best judgment. Fine to disagree, right? We may disagree, but if we all come to that with that common understanding, and the staff comes with a common understanding that, Tab is here, they're excited about their advisory capacity, they want to make sure that we're moving forward. We're all going to then be able to be on the same page and work together well. If for some reason you all are disagreeing with staff's position, staff is actually to inform council. That doesn't mean that you can't, but staff should be informing council, which happens. We're very clear about that. And so I would say the even most formal way to do this, typically, if you all wanted to then address something like that, would be to go to Natalie and say, this is one we want to speak on. This is one where we want some time and we want to be heard. And she would bring that forward. And then this is really more a guideline for city staff, but know that when more than one board or commission is weighing in, each of those set of recommendations are going to be reflected separately. So sometimes, for example, we'll have something that, well, the parking is going to be a great example here of something that there will be a variety of boards and commissions that weigh in on this, and we will be sure to reflect Transportation Advisory Board has these thoughts, these reflections, these recommendations. Any questions about the relative roles and obligations and. Yes.
On point number 5, when we're advocating to council and. Is it always important to identify yourself as a board member, even if it's totally unrelated to your board?
Oh, so that's a great idea. So say, for example, that you want to go talk about the duck races. Well, I mean, maybe that's transportation.
Waterways.
Waterways, right?
Let's start a zoo.
Yeah.
Yes.
Establish a zoo.
Yes, you know, I think council considers it a courtesy for you to identify yourself as a board member and say that that you are speaking in your individual capacity. I think it just helps them sort of frame, who's in front of them.
Yeah, and for the public to understand that as well, you know, yeah.
So I have a mechanics question kind of, because I'm going back and looking at our draft here, about the board shall take action by voting on motions to forward its advice, recommendations, findings, and proposals. When do we need to have a public hearing before having a motion and considering it? And when can we just be like, hey, let's just, you know, amongst ourselves, something comes up and we're like, oh, we should probably tell council this.
That's a great question. There are things that the code requires you
Yes.
to have a public hearing on
So
recommendations.
Yeah.
But
NGP.
yeah, well, the only time the word recommendations actually comes up is review and provide recommendations to the city manager concerning policy issues on the operating programs. So that's your traffic engineering, parking. That's when it's required.
Okay,
If it's, I would say, and Teresa, correct me if you have a different perspective.
sure.
If there's something that's really important to the board for something else, like we really think that it's important to initiate the parking, neighborhood parking program, or to make changes to the NPP. And we feel so strongly about it that we want to make a recommendation to city council and we want to hear what the public has to say. Then you could hold a public hearing on something like that too. It's not required, but it's something, I would say it's within their purview. Any recommendation, but the only recommendation that I'm seeing, yeah, so that,
Oh, something that's called a recommendation form.
Yeah,
I understand the
Right.
distinction. Again, this is one of those moments where like, there's a little lawyer distinction that we're.
Yeah, I think this is where the charter is very gray, like it's unclear because we have these other like SEEPs, right? Where the like actual procedure of doing a SEEP, you know, our SEEP handbook, the city handbook on the SEEPs, I believe says you take it to your boards and council for, you know, for action, right? And so, but in here, it doesn't say get a recommendation on the SEEP, right? It's just not, it's not consistent, I guess.
Monitor and propose change.
It just says to review
Right.
environmental assessments and capital improvements.
Right, so maybe we should define, when we say that TAB is making a recommendation, they're making a recommendation to council that they do X, Y, or Z.
Mhm.
And I think that's what gets kind of muddy.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So adopt this ordinance change.
So
Right.
I agree with Janet that there are times where you are absolutely required.
Yes.
And then there are other times where it's permissible.
Okay.
And I think you want to be clear about whether you held a public hearing or not when you're providing any kind of advisory opinion, maybe call it, right?
What I'm concerned about is trying to come up with a statement from TAB and, you know, like some kind of recommendation, weighing in on something. And have it sort of be defective because we didn't have a public hearing.
if you're going to be speaking for the board at something, you need to check in with and have, well, and a public hearing on that, to be speaking before the board. That's a really good distinction.
Would you mind if we chew on this a bit?
Thank you.
No, it's an important distinction you're making, and it is a great area.
Okay.
And so what we can do is provide some guidance about what we think would be best,
Okay.
given the parameters that we have.
Right.
And that gets us to noon exactly.
Teresa.
I
I hear her closet is awesome.
Labels.
Containers.
So we will head over to lunch. You can exit that through that door or these double doors, then we'll let you in. The lunch is right on the other side of this.
Okay.
One of the things that as an activity kind of reflection that will continue merging your thought process with what you're doing is to I'm just gonna pass this out. To fill in this activity at your eating lunch in terms of your power parameter self-reflection. So how do you, and it's just you, just marking a line. When you think around your power, decision-making, thought process, what happens when a decision is made and you felt like, that wasn't the right decision, where are you at? Marking yourself in that spectrum. There's no right or wrong answer. This is just
Truly the post on Hermie.
this is just you to help understand kind of your thinking around certain things. And I have this, I know I gave you the roll power differentials. I have this one, status power differentials. If you want to take that up, you're more than welcome. Just leave it back there. Then you're ready to go. Perfect.
No, thank you.
Yeah, it's okay if I get to.
Yes, would you like me to get you lunch?
I know I've got my big.
Brought your own lunch.
Or you can use it. Open.
Devin Johnson, Garrett Slater, Stephen Beagle, and Johnny Bean.
Staff.
Staff, yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't have to share.
Well, some of these are different, like these aren't effective for me. Like I said, why is truth and harmony? Like, whoa. I vote. They are not mutually exclusive. But that's something that's a fact focus versus relationship focus. Yeah, it's very good. Do I have my work brain on or do I have my, front brain on?
And that's part of, as we navigate.
You're on mark right when you started.
It's interesting to me to see this as personal and role power. And for me, the answers would be quite different if I was thinking
Yeah.
personal power only or role power only. I remember being really surprised that people felt intimidated by my being the city attorney. I was like, but it's just me. I'm just Teresa. And I had to come to understand that like there was a role power to that
Yeah.
meant something to some people.
Also what it required for us to remove some of the labels that we would have with what's intimidating, the word intimidating. I was given that feedback 2 months ago when I was training. And I was really, you're just really intimidating. In a good way, I'm like, do you want some coffee? But in my mind, right, intimidation is, I can't talk to you, you're too up here, I can't touch you, anything you will say will be negated. But to put it in a light of in a good way, what does that mean? What does that mean to my own thinking?
There's a degree to which these balances shift with your experience and that are part of your personality, right? So like, this reminds me of all the other kind of assessments, you know what I mean? But, like, I do, the very last one, I mean, I understand that when I have a particular role, I do tend to kind of over-identify with that role. So if I'm saying, I'm an pro tab, like I can, sometimes I do tend to use the roles that I am given or, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really good, especially when it comes to status power and the overlap of that. Because sometimes
Exactly.
there are people who don't want that, who don't want to lean into it.
Exactly.
And that's the cry often within the equity world, right? If you have it, we need that voice just as much, it's just as important as the one who may not have it.
Yeah, there's a bit who are reluctant to mobilize that. I know one of those.
Not fitting.
I will always step in.
Yeah. And how do you do that without also coming across as performative or as sort of the savior of whatever?
Exactly, and that's the important balance of the internal balance, is to understand, well, what power do I really have? And how.
What about from over there? You do it.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of the similar reflections. The personal versus role was to, distinguish, I guess.
Oh, sorry.
What I was like noticing is like I fall kind of in the middle of. In a lot of.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, if there's something wrong with me.
Like,
Really?
No. This is not meant to be like, what's wrong with me? What can't they decide? Not at all.
That's also a good quality for a manager to have. Is that flexibility?
There's a couple of my spouse that's doing this for me.
And you're both at the extreme when it comes to how both role and status connect.
Like, to me, it's important to be strength centered, but also heart centered. So I'm like at both. At both ends.
Yeah.
Yeah, or truth and harmony,
Yeah,
at both.
I did.
I'm baffled by task focus versus relationship focus, because all I can think of is my deficiencies in both of that.
Where did I go?
You're on the back of the thing.
The other idea behind this self-reflection too is often in the work and how we serve, regardless of where the area is, especially when it comes to decision making that might affect others. Being able to hold multiple truths at once. And being able to just hold the tension when there is tension between both. Of we want this to happen, and I understand that city process can be this road that seems never ending. There's tension in that.
Yeah, that's the truth versus harmony thing. I mean, people come with really strong feelings and kind of takes on the situation, you know, and it must, yeah, that's a hard thing to balance.
Yes. Yeah. Right, and so what there's. Imagining.
Vulnerable and vulnerable. I someone in a wheelchair, I am vulnerable, but I don't wanna be vulnerable. So it's like, what do I do?
Yeah. The Senate and the. Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, you're strong, you're a strong advocate. You're a strong person,
and
you
then-
know yourself. You know yourself.
Reality is.
But that's
Superpower.
Yeah, exactly. That is your superpower. Yeah. You're in a society.
Vulnerability is your superpower.
Yeah.
And often vulnerability, up until recently, really hasn't seen as a strength. It can become like, oh, you're oversharing, or it's like you're too much for me. Yeah.
Well, I found it interesting that over the past weekend, Boulder County Police and Fire in the city did the public safety listening session at Center for People with Disabilities.
right?
And I thought it was really amazing to see that happening, because there's a lot of vulnerability in the disability community and a lot of distrust of public and government and fire and police department. So it was great to see them having a conversation of, okay, how can we get, our needs met? Trust you more, what can we do on both sides?
Yeah, and getting that feedback before the actual crisis happens.
I know,
So
and
that
they're
there's awareness.
talking, they're hoping to make it quarterly, and I definitely think they should, because, we need to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
That's how you build a trust right now. Like one woman there said, and she was like an older lady, hard of hearing, had to have special ear thing. And she, when they told the police chief, I'm still suspicious of you. And like, they need to feel comfortable to tell them that.
Yep. Yeah. And so that's also the place of, for us as city servants, to stand in that ground and like, we gotta receive it.
Yeah.
The feedback, because that's what makes us better. So we're going to keep finishing up, want to bring us back. So the next in our agenda is, really for the rest of the time we're together, is being able to, identify what you as board members think are 2 to 3 major priorities that you would like as a board to focus on this year. And so what we'd like you to do is within that reflection, there's sticky notes in front of you. Or you can do it in the paper, whatever is best for you. And on one sticky note, write something that for you is, oh, we really have to focus on this. So take a couple of minutes for that reflection. We won't share right now what we're saying, and then I'll collect them, and then we'll start digging into some of those topics.
What do you want?
So think in your mind, between two or three policies or topics that you feel are really important for TAB to be focusing on.
And this is why I asked for the inclusion of the transportation department priorities for the year. We do something like start a zoo. That's not gonna necessarily be a useful priority for us. Unless you had a secret zoo plan going on down there. You're like, how'd you know? You know me, waterways and zoo. Gondolas. A water gondola and an air gondola.
Can I ask a quick question of staff? How did the state priorities filter down to us? So for instance, the law about parking minimums, right? How do we, and somebody asked me this over the weekend, like, so how does that apply to Boulder? How do we filter that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and Janet and I haven't had a time, she already is on top of it, sent me an email, it's like, we need to talk about all these things.
There's so much transportation now, right?
Yeah, and we haven't done that yet, but at a high level, so the parking minimums, work that will flow through that work plan item for us, because we'll just get, essentially alignment through that. And it'll be broader than just the parking minimums that the state bill had. Because that was limited in geographic scope.
Yeah, that's had to be in a transit survey.
That's the thing, it's so, there are all these little specific stuff.
Right, so ours will be, specific to our local area. But it will be above and beyond what the state has. And it's the same with, there's other land use bills that it's kind of the same situation, like we've already kind of exceeded the minimum standard through the state, whatever the state has passed. And then there are a few other items that Janet did identify for us to look at if there are necessary any like work plan items that may come out of the state bills that passed. Like the hands-free, like no mobile device item, that there might be something that we may want to consider at a local level. I don't really know enough about it to say, one way or the other right now, but it's on our radar to be looking at those things. Is there anything more to add there?
Yeah, I'm still catching up with what they did.
Yeah.
There's so much.
There were a lot, yeah.
Right, yeah. Or that you're gonna have to.
Yeah.
But then I want us to have a voice on it, because there's so much interesting stuff that's happening. So I'm trying to figure out how to.
Yes.
Bring that into a work item.
Right, yeah, and sometimes whatever it feels just like whatever, how it ever comes out, part of this dialogue is to actually kind of extend it out more, extend the dialogue.
Jedi.
It's equity, diversity, and inclusion, dude.
Yeah.
It's gay.
Justice.
Oh. The world that's young friends.
One more.
Let's see what we got here. So anything that's sort of grouping in, you know, they're overlapping, that just means that I found some themes. So I'm just gonna read them for you. So first we have a few around safety, multimodal infrastructure, safety bike theft, and disability public safety. RTD, bus rapid transit. Cans to protected bike lanes, which kind of goes with it, but focus on can continue to work to support and fund further implementation of CAN. Sidewalk repairs, ADA accessibility, TDM ordinance. There's a lot of lingo here, but I mean, new TOD law. And implications of bringing transit back to BII.
Boulder Dental. Sorry, BJAD.
Rapidly.
Exactly, right.
Boulder Junction. Sidewalk repairs, eliminate mandatory parking minimums. Support/encourage parking code changes. Parking maximums and new development rule. And then assist/enhance city messaging regarding IRIS and large projects. So it's around safety, RTD, messaging or like communication. ADA accessibility, which really is kind of great because in the middle, it's part of it. Something that I also know as with Amy and I leading the work around equity at the city, is that transportation has really been one of the very initial departments that has put in the racial equity instrument at play with some projects, and that has been really outstanding. And just a quick overview, the racial equity instrument, that is a training that we do for all city staff. It's open to anyone. It's part of our 3 core trainings. We do 3. One is advancing racial equity, the role of government, bias and microaggression training, and then this racial equity instrument that basically guides us through a 6-step process to ensure that any new project, policy, or program that staff is thinking about implementing doesn't have any further unintended consequences to some of the communities that have already been excluded, disenfranchised, etc. And so that's an instrument that allows the richness of it is the dialogue that happens based on all of the questions that staff walks through. I know that's something that Val has led and is been really amazing. And then these sort of around the new TOD. So I don't know what I will just you.
This is where we get unscripted.
Yeah.
That's good.
So which one you might wanna, there feels like there's some things around. Safety, CAN, and parking, because those are the majority. We could have
I've always loved to talk about parking.
You can move the TDM ordinance one over to the parking section.
Oh, great,
That it's part of it, yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And does that feel like a relative, not that anything would be simple conversation, but would that be kind of an initial where we want to start the
Yeah.
conversation? Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
I put eliminate parking minimums and I am pretty confident that this is going to happen with city council. I thought about the parking maximums and I don't think I'm there. I've read Strong Towns doesn't support that and they see that as a just another regulation that could interfere with development and with the government, substituting their views that might be too overbroad. So
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear what. And it is in some ways appealing, but I'm not sure that I'm there.
The elimination of these, the minimums is the important. thing.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I put it in parking maximums, so just because that's the other sort of side of that, but you're right that it's just another regulation and it's not necessarily
Mhm.
important. I mean, it can be in some places, right? But I think I would be with you on the Strong Town side.
So Valerie, Natalie, can you let us know, like, what the parking code update and TDM ordinance was already on priority project. Like, you remind us what the scope of that is. Kind of got this right for the last tab.
It's not, is it even something we need to prioritize? It's your priority, so it's just something that can be brought to us.
That's right. It's a work plan priority for staff identified by city council as one of their top, I think it's in their top 10 maybe. But do you wanna, it's funny because each time I get up to. You want to just a brief summary of the scope of that? Okay.
This work is really being led out of Planning and Development Services Department, but we in Transportation and Mobility will be team members on that interdepartmental effort. So there's two things happening, companion pieces. One is an update to the municipal code on parking. And another is, I guess, a more robust TDM ordinance. And those things would work hand in hand. And you think about maybe a development project that might come to tab that was referred to you by council. Now there will, in this work of it, what will be created is, more just cohesive guidance around those two topics. So that not every time there's a development project, you have to reinvent the wheel and come up with a new plan working with that development project. So that's really the kind of scope of work, is the creation of those two pieces, or the update of the parking code. And then I think when you talk about things like eliminating parking minimums, in that work, of course, the city staff will be considering, what types of levers do we have, right? And things you can adjust across the board in terms of parking requirements. So that I guess is the most succinct I could be in terms of the scope, but just wanted to highlight that, as your role as TAB members, that's something that you would be asked for feedback on along the way as staff develops an approach and a methodology for those things.
So when council asked you to look at this, toward what end? Like, they were like, please push it to this direction, that direction.
They were, the clearest was around eliminating parking minimums.
Okay.
That was like, they spoke to that quite a bit at the retreat.
For new development only? Are we talking about retrofitting what we've got?
Oh, I think it
Applicable
was
to new development.
new development only, yeah. And I will just add, it's at this point coming to city council for just a study session on August 8th. So we'll be sure to just get into this meeting and see if there's something that we want to provide for you all as like an info item or even an agenda item around that time too.
Okay.
That surprises me that it would be for new development only.
It doesn't surprise me. Yeah, because you can't retroactively, I mean, I think Janet can probably speak to it better than I can.
Yeah, exactly. But the main idea, or one of the main ideas, is that there have been some development reviews and developers who have changed their presentation. They've changed their plan based on the parking that's available. And they've relied on what the parking has been approved. And so to retroactively apply that to them could be an undue, and I use the word developer.
I don't understand that, because it's removing a requirement.
Well, so there have been different things knocked around, different proposals, and removing the parking requirements. I don't know. I don't think that we've taken a deep dive into that.
Yeah, I don't think we have either. But that's, a question that we can bring up as we start the work.
Part of the issue, just from a land use perspective, would be to go back and change all those entitlements that have been granted. That would be a tremendous amount of staff work for no real purpose. Right? I mean,
I'm not understanding what entitlements would.
so for example, if you've had, let's say you've had a shopping center approved, part of what's approved in that is your parking. And so to change that would have to be to go back and amend that plan. But those are rights that are already vested with the property.
But if that developer then wanted, given this new
regulation or, removal of regulation. If they wanted to then further develop part of their parking area,
Right.
that would be a new plan that would go to.
Yes,
planning board.
exactly.
So there's the room, but it creates the opportunity for that, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
it does.
Yeah.
It certainly creates the opportunity potentially
Mhm.
to look at those areas that were designated as parking lots and for developers to think,
Exactly,
is there some other use for this?
exactly. Well, and it's like what's happening at Diagonal Plaza and all that space, so, yeah.
Okay, so then the question remains, like, should this actually be a priority area for TAB to focus on?
I think it's something we should watch, we should be really engaged with,
Yeah,
Yeah,
but maybe it's not
if
something that we
it
can.
doesn't pass this year, that would be concerning.
But it's coming from the state at this point.
Well, that's only for transit oriented.
I talked to Judy over the weekend and some second thing.
Exactly,
That's right at the end.
there's House Bill 1313, which was the
Yes.
TOD stuff, and then
Yeah.
there was a separate parking law.
Right.
Which I forget the.
There was like
Yeah.
the pot pie bill at the end, where it had stuff to do with some other things. She didn't use the word pot pie, but it was a culinary analogy.
Board.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, so
looking to see if I can find it.
So I imagine in that study session for council in August on this project, a lot of these questions will get answered. Around like what the implications are from the state bill and how does that fit into the work that we're doing? Specifically also around timeline of this project. This project I know is going to take, the team has scoped like 12 to 18 months for it. So the actual ordinance change, like updates won't occur until 2025. But I think if there's this question of, well, what about state legislation and like, when does that come into effect? And how does that impact us immediately? If it does, what's our process around that? I think all of that will be answered in the study session, so.
Because both of you were saying earlier that these boulders. will
That was
come
my
beyond
understanding, yeah.
the
mhm,
state,
Right, because my
You said
understanding
it.
was that there was a geographic limitation to the state bill.
right?
different criteria
Yeah.
for the area to which it applies.
Yeah.
Having to do with transit
Mhm.
service.
I just want to mention that I don't think parking should be a priority because we really should focus on repaving sidewalks and promoting other forms of transportation besides individual cars.
Absolutely.
Right, well, I think that's why the parking conversation comes into play, if we have a lot of public space devoted to parking private cars, and what if we used it for something different?
I say
Or
let's
price
use
it
it
differently.
for something different.
Yeah, or price it differently, so we could have the money that we're constantly lacking to do some of these other. Yeah, yeah.
Well, and to that end, as a priority area, focusing on sidewalk conditions, transit access, that kind of stuff is perhaps more germane to our
Yeah.
capacity.
So as the chair of TAB, what I was hoping to get out of this kind of exercise was I'm not even sure policies is the right noun. I don't know what the noun is. But 2 or 3 things that we as TAB would sort of keep top of mind as we're, as things arise that staff brings to us for our meetings, bearing in mind, we're purely advisory, right? We're pretty clear, we're not putting anything new on staff's plate. And I am, personally quite invested in making sure that, like, I like this list of priorities. I like the direction staff is going in. And so I want to make this sort of work year as successful as possible. And in particular, I'm worried about the speed hump of Iris Avenue. I think as 19th Street kind of gets underway, we're probably gonna hear some more, confused people despite almost a decade of work by staff on 19th Street. We're gonna have to help staff do the things that they're already planning. And so what can we as TAB in our role, advising them and interfacing, and I forget the language exactly, but be like the first line of communication with the public. How can, in that role, we be effective?
What I hear a lot is confusion about the scope of CAN. And how all the projects that are being, all the open houses and surveys and things go together. And so that we can certainly help in that regard.
Yes, and so, yeah, just to talk about Pam specifically. Alex Weinheimer told me one day, he was like, and this was shortly after the Safe Streets report draft that we saw. The most recent Safe Streets report that had, like, it was like 47 pages long, and buried on page 42 was like, 65% of our KSI crashes are happening on 12% of our, roadways.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, you buried the lead here. That's the point of this whole report. We should really stop nipping around the margins of this. And let's focus where the crashes are. And Alex really, like, that really resonated with him, and he called me and he's like, I drew new maps. Should I give them to staff? And I'm like, no. They're their own experts. I understand you have special expertise, but don't muck with their work. So he took them to city council instead. And he and Ryan Schuhard really kind of beefed it up. They gave it a very good pitch, and they talked several members of city council into really recognizing where we were already spending money, because that was Alex's, like, distilled at his core. Let's spend money wisely. You're gonna spend money, let's do it in the right place. Let's do it where it counts. And so he and Ryan did share their maps, and city council was like, we like that map. Staff, don't you like the map? And they're like, yeah, we like the map.
To be clear, we were not there.
You're not part of that. And so council kind of picked up these maps and were like, okay, this is the core arterial network. A little bit of back and forth about what should be included and why and where, which pieces were missing, what were gonna be too hard to do. So like there's a section of canyon that's not there because we don't have the crash history on it. I'm like, that's interesting. Doesn't seem right to me, but whatever. But that's how CAN happens.
Yeah.
Gabriella, you're.
And maybe
Viola,
can I add, yes, can I maybe add, since this is, gonna live on. Also, what we continue to tell the department and, remind ourselves that this is all consistent with decades of transportation planning work. And the corridors identified, well, yes, the lead was buried in the Safe Street or in the draft. The attention to our major arterial corridors has always been known that that's what's needed. What really the pivot is just how we organize ourselves and structure ourselves to deliver the work more quickly. Because we had been in a pattern, and historically it took us decades to do big corridor planning projects that we would, then wait on funding to be able to take to the next phase of work. And what changed with this direction from council was really just the way that we structure ourselves and deliver the work. And that's big, like that's huge. And I'm not trying to like downplay that, but it's also important to recognize that this work has always been important to us and has always been identified as necessary. And that's important, for the department.
Yeah, I think really what changed was that council finally got it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the message
The
about how
story.
critical this is.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time and money. And before that, staff was sort of expected to just like do everything.
Right.
And so you had just so many plates spinning on all these chopsticks.
Yeah.
But nothing was really prioritized the way that we're like, if you actually want something to change and you
Yeah, yeah.
actually want to treat the problem that now we have data for. Now we have a better story about why, and council got it, and they're like, okay, let's prioritize this.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the story that still hasn't quite percolated out to the general public.
I think you're right, because mostly, so what I think a lot of us tend to hear from community members is the safety stuff that has more to do with personal safety on, neighborhood streets and like speed on neighborhood streets and things like that. So that the dissolution of the neighborhood, maybe not dissolution, but the deprioritization of the neighborhood street, management program is concerning to a lot of people. Because that shift or that, the importance of the prioritization of resources is not necessarily super clear.
Right.
Yeah, well, and it's also a quality of life thing. And so what do we address, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are people who back up to Iris, and their quality of
Oh, yeah.
life,
Yeah.
their property values are significantly lower than their neighbors are 2 blocks away.
Yeah.
For sure.
Because of that street.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's, that's part of the messaging that we could do, but I personally, I'm the advanced support city communication on Iris.
Yeah.
Just because Iris is the next big thing that's coming up, so it's not gonna be the only thing, it's not gonna be, whatever. Maybe I think that's something that we could do and that we could actually be very impactful.
Yeah, and I think like what you brought up about people not being aware, I don't think people have a clue when we talk about CAN,
No.
what we're talking about.
Right.
And they need to, and they
Right.
need to understand that Iris is part of CAN and that it has already been approved. It's not like this new thing and why it's all important.
Right. And I think that part of it is being able to tell the story that this isn't a new squirrel, right? But actually, it's been on staff's like radar for forever. They just hadn't been given a big signal, like, you can now do it quickly, let's get going already.
Just have a
Yes.
clarification question, because I've heard like the first 3 priorities in CAN are baseline, Iris and Folsom, and yet I see 30th Street is happening. Is that
That's
preceding it?
exactly because, that's exactly because these corridor projects have always been on the work plan, right? But we did them in a very staged kind of traditional approach that just took a lot of time. And so, so the first phase of 30th is getting built, this year, right? And we already have the I guess the first phase of work for the next section to get into preliminary engineering. And then we have funding identified through the big federal grant to be able to build the next phase. But we did that corridor study back in 2013. Well, no, I think it was 15 or 16,
Yeah, it was-
because I came in 14, it was
Yeah.
shortly after that. So, but that gives you an example. That was 10 years ago, we did a corridor study, right? And now we're starting to build the first phase of that project. 30th and Colorado Underpass technically was the first, because that was identified as part of that corridor study. But that gives you, like, that's why those things are moving forward, because they've been on the work plan, right? Like, those projects have been in development for years and years. The focus on these 3 corridors is really like, identified and called out, because that work there hadn't been, aside from Folsom Living Lab and Iris being identified as Living Lab, those corridors hadn't been really studied. And so that's why those were identified as priorities for when CAN came to be.
I have a question, and it's like a parallel question, but is there anything that we can do to expedite the process of how things get approved and, all the red tape, so things can get going in a quicker way, like especially when we identify that there's a big problem intersection, right? And I'm just speaking hypothetically, but there must be something we can do. I mean, I understand that there's places where there is a necessity, right? And you do need to have like the community engagement and all those like very lengthy process in place. But then there's other places where we're really doing the community a disservice by not acting as quickly as possible. So is there anything that we can do to kind of establish something with city council to expedite, to recognize the urgency and then expedite these projects?
Well, I mean, I'd say we're kind of doing that with CAN, right? Like those.
This is expedited.
This is expedited.
Well, extra expedited.
And I think the Safe Streets report that then leads into the Vision Zero Action Plan, it is our mechanism for finding those spot locations or those areas of concern across the city that, where the data is telling us both retroactively, there's been a crash history, or proactively, that there are all these risk factors there. And, you know, we're using that, you know, kind of state of the practice approach here in Boulder. That is our mechanism for funneling the resources that we have to those most crucial locations. So, you know, I think there's a difference between kind of our work program and where our analysis leads us. And then maybe where the community might think those places are, and those don't always overlap. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, and that's our high impact network, right?
Yeah,
But,
high risk network, yes.
yeah. And is there a way that we can remove steps to expedite once we have identified these corridors and intersections? And I think that there's a lot of time that we spend, and not only in Boulder, but in general, you know, like, there's a lot of time that's really translates into deaths, you know, and to not saving people's lives. And I think that that's what we should kind of shift and see how we can just be obvious, you know, like, why should we have to spend all this time doing this when we know this is what we need, you know, kind of thing. So I don't know, maybe try to.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, I think we're open to it, like, without speaking to like really specific tangible, you know, projects, it's hard to say, but I think we're hopefully demonstrating that we're open to that when it's possible. I will say, you know, what comes to mind is the death of, I think it was Virginia at Alpine and Balsam. And that was you know, that may be one that comes to mind for you of like, well, you didn't just change the lighting right away. And it's like, or the signal operations right away. And I know I did say in a meeting that we weren't going to do that because we have kind of a method to determine when it's appropriate to do that. And the current method says that the current operations are acceptable and appropriate for what's happening at that intersection. That may change. We're looking at our signal practices, and that may identify for us that there needs to be a change. So while we're flexible, there are also engineering standards and we comply with those. And that doesn't mean that we can't use professional judgment at times. And that's what, through the speed limit setting project, I think we also demonstrated our flexibility because we are using professional judgment to say, well, maybe we don't totally agree with what the model spit out here. There may be some tweaks that we're going to make based on professional judgment. So those are two examples I would use as like where we can show flexibility and where we also maybe are less flexible because we really need to trust the guidance that we're using. So hopefully that works. But
I would suggest that I really think that the community needs a better understanding about how long it takes to do these things. What idea we're dealing with, like you said, they just here not fixing it right away. Well, maybe they need to understand why.
yeah,
But that it is
Great
being
point.
fixed.
Yeah.
And it just takes
Yeah.
what's happening in the.
right.
Yeah, and well, at the same time, not making them feel that they've missed their chance to weigh in. So-
Yeah, exactly.
Playing a tightrope you've been walking.
It is a tightrope.
It is nice. Which I've been trying to shove you out, you know.
Right, yeah.
Well,
What
So-
role can we play? in
yeah,
that
what role
process?
can we play in that process?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and this was true when we both Folsom, on 55th. As part of the Living Labs, it was just members of TAB that would come to the city meetings and talk.
Yeah.
We could have public hearings with the understanding we're not actually going to take a vote on it. We could do more than one public hearing.
Yeah.
On this stuff, at TAB meetings.
Yeah.
We could, I would say we could schedule our own event, but it's like, it always falls on staff to like facilitate that stuff. Because that's actually adding to the workload. Well, I have you people here. We hadn't really talked about, yes, we get emails and things from members of the public. But we also will occasionally get requests from journalists who want to write on these projects.
Right.
Do you have guidance about that?
things to be careful of, things to not do. And if I wanted to encourage us, say, to use our individual voices.
Well, for example, Becky Davies was quoted by the Boulder Reporting Lab
Yeah.
on the TDM ordinance stuff and like the parking changes. I mean, so she was clearly speaking on her own behalf. But, they do
They
come to
follow us
us,
'cause
they
we're on
come
behalf.
to us as,
Right.
members of this committee, this board, so. Yeah, that's kind of tricky. Oftentimes what we do is defer to our communications experts. But I can understand in your position, it might be challenging to say, our communications department, I think that it's important that the city has a unified message.
Yeah.
And so if your understanding is inconsistent or your passion is inconsistent with what the position is that's been taken with the city, it does put you in kind of a.
Well,
We are advisory.
Stop this, and so, since we're talking about Iris, let's use this as an example. So staff will be going through a seat process, there are already alternatives that are, out in the public. And we'll be evaluating those alternatives and coming to a preferred recommendation, taking those to, planning board tab and then council ultimately for approval. So say as tab is learning about the alternatives and maybe a member of the board has a position on where we should go with the project. And they want to share that publicly, whether that's through a letter to the editor. And where this is also, I'm thinking of like the airport. So there's a
Yeah.
planning board member who
Yes.
is very interested in an outcome with
Yes.
the airport.
Yeah.
And so on her own behalf, she's been writing to, letters to the editor about her position on the airport. Is that something tab members could, could they do that in an individual capacity? Okay. But it's not as a board, not taking a position as.
No,
And not representing the city.
I have a question, guys. I read a monthly disability column for the Boulder Weekly. Is that gonna be a conflict of interest?
Shouldn't, are you paid for that?
Yeah.
Should not be a conflict of interest. If something were to come up where you. As you go along, keep a conflict of interest in mind. Because it could be that something in particular comes up, maybe something that you wrote about comes for, the thing is, you all aren't decision makers, and so. Nonetheless, you could still hold a conflict of interest, but, I don't know how to explain it except to say if your spidey sense is going off, that like, uh-oh, is this a problem? Call Jenna and ask about the particular fact situation.
I like it right now, I'm doing like a super on travel accessibility. Because I just went travel to DC for the disability policy seminar. And now I'm gonna write my, how it went. And I know that can touch a lot about, ease of travel accessibility, and I'm like, is that gonna be an issue?
Sure, as long as you're speaking as an individual.
Okay.
And you're not saying this is what tab, this is the position of the city, this is the position of tab. Because you have a First Amendment right to express your opinion. That's your experience, and that's really
Right.
important to get out there.
Yeah, that's.
Well, I think that's something that often overlooked, in particular is disability travel.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm trying to bring a light on it, but I wanna make sure I'm not crossing any boundaries.
No, as long as you're speaking in your individual capacity, there shouldn't be a problem at all.
All right, great.
Well, I want to come back to something you said right at the end of your remarks just now, and that was, I do think it's important for the city to speak in a unified voice. I also think it's important for the city to actually take opposing viewpoints from their boards and commissions. Like, we are hired to not rubber stamp everything that staff does. And we are not speaking on behalf of the city almost ever, I would think. We are,
Well, let's dial it in a little bit,
Okay.
actually.
okay.
So Tab is the city. Good news, you're part of the city now, right?
Yeah.
And so and it's something that I could think about in this way is you all make a recommendation to council. It goes up, they don't take your recommendation, they go a different way.
Right.
You know, would you individually have the First Amendment right to talk about that was different than the recommendation? You would.
Mhm.
I would encourage you to think about, are we undermining the policy and purpose of city council? If we are out there, once a decision has been made, criticizing that decision. I leave that to your discretion. I leave that to your discretion.
Well, for an example, like you're part of the community cycles advocacy, right? And so from that perspective, she might say, this was the wrong way to go.
I think it's
But
perfectly.
but if TAB were to come out as a board and say this was the wrong way to go, that would be a difficult position for everyone.
Right.
I think, for the council, for TAB.
Yeah.
For staff,
And it's challenging because of these different roles.
right? So, I mean, in a way, think about it as in your individual capacity,
Mhm.
say what you need and want to say. But as a board, I would think, my opinion
Mhm.
is that I would think that it would have to be something pretty extreme for the board to come out and criticize the city council.
What
Not
about
that it
when,
couldn't
what about when the
happen.
board disagrees with the staff recommendation to city council?
Absolutely.
Right? This is-
That's important that you advise council of, right? Decision hasn't been made yet.
Right,
And so we're wanting,
okay.
right, part of what we're doing here as staff and as an advisory board is making sure that the council is fully apprised of everything that they should be considering in making their decision.
Okay.
I just want to bring attention to time. There's 5 more themes to kind of get through. We have 45 minutes, which is about like
Okay.
10 minutes for each topic. But I just want to see, do we feel resolve about this? Right, it doesn't stop here.
Wait yet. To answer Darcy's question, what can we do?
Yeah,
We have a better sense of what we can do now?
What do
I-
But do we want to do? What-
Yeah.
Or do we want to point ourselves?
well, I think there are 2 things I can think of. One is grants and staying on top of how we can guide staff to get funding for CAN. And also feedback on implementation, like I feel like maybe things like Iris have been delayed just because of the long process of community engagement that may not have been fully necessary. So I worry about, that happening again with Folsom. So it's something we could talk about.
I think there's a big opportunity right now to engage the community through messaging and through our communications team. So perhaps
Through the city's communications team?
cities, yes. So maybe crafting something to kind of let people know what CAN is all about, what these projects entail, why things take the time they take, and so the community feels more part of the process.
I mean, so there's no lack of detail in these project pages that are sitting on the city website. They aren't anything too exhaustive.
Yes,
And
maybe
that might be
that's-
part of where like we're getting in the way, like, we're trying to show how all of the sausage is made.
Maybe making it more digestible.
So
for
how would
people.
we as TAB do
Well,
that?
that's my question, like, can we, because like Aisha, your communications person, right, like, we can't say to her as
I
tab, we
would
want
love
you
to
to
look at
develop
drafts
this thing.
and give her
Yeah.
suggestions.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that.
How much capacity do we have to ask someone like Aisha to draft something for the public? I don't know.
Or she's probably drafting stuff all the time, but
Right.
can we offer feedback on that?
I would also mention that we need to stop I've been hearing and expecting people to come. I need to go to the communities, especially the minority communities, because they're often working or whatever, low income. Why, when you're offering your public hearing, so they have feeling like you don't care about their opinion.
Okay, that's something that Eric Amador did very skillfully with Iris English. There's like an 85-page report for all the engagement she did last year.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, really incredible.
Different times, different places.
Different times, different places,
And what,
different
and
constituencies.
it's not that there was a tab number every time.
No.
Yeah, next,
So
you know,
we
so,
don't do
yeah.
that.
I think, yeah, so I mean, I think reviewing our communications, around the project is probably not a great use of your time. And also would not be a great use of staff's time. Like, Aisha already struggles to get my review. Like, we don't need to add more layers of review. And that not because of Aisha, because of me. Like, I'm falling behind on getting my reviews. But I think, what is helpful is that sort of feedback of a public hearing's not gonna get everybody's voices heard, right? And so when I think about an opportunity for board members across the city, right, even beyond just transportation projects, it's like your networks out in the community are where even when I think about my service on nonprofit boards, so much of my role on that board is to be talking to community about the work that nonprofit does, right?
Yeah.
And helping people understand why it's important and why it's important that they get involved. And so to me, that's like one of the most critical roles for our board members, especially in the realm that you care about around, traffic safety and advocacy. Like, to me, your opportunity is to spread that information out to your networks and out to people in the community, even if aren't in your network, right? Because then that will draw them into all of the work that staff's already doing. We don't need more engagement opportunities. We're doing 100 things, right? But we need a diverse set of people there to give their voices. Because I can say at the last public, open house we had over 200 people show up. And I'll also say a good majority of those perspectives were the same.
Yeah.
And so how do we get diverse voices represented in the room? And that's where we do our work with the people we know and the way that we can get the word out across the whole city. But that's why we have board members, to help lift up that work into the community and then get people engaged.
Yeah.
So that's where I would say kind of what we would, as staff, would appreciate your focus, as opposed to like reviewing the work we're already doing.
Yeah.
Right, can I give an illustration of that? Some of us may be involved in school PTOs, or one of our family members is associated with another organization in the community. And transportation might not be the number one thing that group is thinking about every day. Maybe it's access to healthy food, or maybe it's something else, right? But helping to lift up these transportation issues with groups you're already involved with and asking them to help broadcast. Why does this matter to the people in your organization? Why does it matter to show up to an open house? I think that is a built-in mechanism you already have as TAP members just by being part of the community.
I mean, that's what comes to mind. Maybe that's what I've heard before, is like our role really is to do that, is to amplify the opportunities that exist and make sure that our communities and other, people we know are engaged in those conversations. So I think that's our number one role.
I will add to that, is there staff doing any kind of plain language materials? Cause that's a great way to reach diverse communities, especially when English might not be their first language.
Yeah.
And I think that right now, that's a huge issue. We're not getting their voices because they don't understand the jargon or acronyms or whatever. So I'm really learning more about this plain language, and I really think as a board, we can maybe push that out.
I love that. Yeah, and we are thinking a lot about that with the digital accessibility work that we're doing across the city in our training around like plain language. I know we're, across all of our departments, we're thinking about that. How can we do a better job on our websites to make it less jargony? And that actually reminds me, like, there was another piece I was going to say, like, because I said, it doesn't help to just review stuff, but when we are coming to tab and presenting information, and Tila, I think of you often doing this, like, you do provide that feedback of like, here's how you can say this better, right? And just like plain speak about it, right? And that's helpful because then as we go on and have those, presentations with community members or at council, that feedback is taken and it improves kind of the outcome. So it's not like I didn't mean, as I was going back, I was like, oh, I didn't mean that as a blanket thing. It's as there's an opportunity to weigh in when we're coming forward to tab, I think it makes sense that there's that like check and input.
And to add to that, I know that you guys do a great job about this, but also having bilingual or trilingual materials.
Maybe it's worth taking a moment just to review the funding mechanism. This is all through Dr. Cog's TIP. Is that the main source of funding?
Specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're using a lot of local funding for just city sales and use tax, transportation dedicated fund dollars. And then to actually get to implementation, we've relied on grants. So Dr. Cog TIP is one of the mechanisms to do that. That's the Denver Regional Council of Governments, their transportation improvement program, is typically the way, and Garrett's on, I'm sure you can speak to this in more detail. But that's the way that we've generally gone after funding to implement big capital projects. It requires a local match.
That's a 4-year
cycle. Or is it 4 or
I
5?
think it depends.
Yeah.
It changes, but sometimes it's closer together, sometimes it's further apart.
I really appreciated the SIP presentation at our last meeting. I mean, the way that the city and Garrett's department are leveraging the local tax dollars and also federal grants. And there's so much federal money that's come out recently for all this stuff. So there's the Dr. Cog TIP money, there's the federal grants, there's the collaborative stuff with the county and everything else. And so, yeah, that was a great presentation.
And I think what's important to highlight is that our local dollars are not near enough to both fund and implement new enhancements to the system and maintain them over time. So that's why we have to leverage our local dollars for those grants to have more transformative projects.
Yes.
And we also have to weigh that against our work plan across all the subject areas that we work on. We have to weigh that against our staffing resources. So grant pursuits are competitive. We don't always win against competing with other cities. So it's a very complex picture. But it's great that you're asking about that.
I just think it might be helpful if we could help keep an eye on opportunities and make sure.
Oh, we do. One that they didn't already know about.
Exactly. Yeah. So I will say, I think, and you're certainly welcome to do that. And also, there's probably nobody closer than our staff to those funding opportunities. I mean, it is part of our job to literally be finding money all the time. So, we Trini always sends emails and that's totally fine. I think we usually know about them. Oftentimes there's eligibility criteria related to a lot of these grants. And right now we're set up with a lot of money coming down the pipeline because of the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant that we got, the 23 million. And then we have some Dr. Cog TIP funding available already that's going to start flowing. We also are on the wait list for Dr. Cog TIP money. So as money becomes available, those projects could get funded and pulled up off the wait list. And we have kind of regular, like the HSIP grants, just like state money that we go after. But we're definitely limited in local funding to match these grants, and we're limited in staff resources to do the work, right? And those two things you're going to be hearing a lot about in the coming years. We are so constrained as a city with our financial situation, and even more so in transportation than probably the rest of the city. So those two things are going to continue to really constrain us until we figure out other funding mechanisms.
And I'll just tack one more thing onto the end of this is that there is, I think it was their very first packet when you all were seated as new tab members, we had an exhibit that shows the funding status of the whole CAN network. So even though these are realities that we're facing, the good news is that we've made a ton of progress just in the last 2 years in securing funding for most of the CAN. There's still some segments that need a path forward, but we really got to work straight away when council made this a priority because we knew that we didn't have the local dollars to achieve that vision. So we had to start going after the grants and we just did really well. It's a testament to the hard work of staff who just jumped at it and said, we have these opportunities now, let's go for it. And we just got lucky in how successful we were in those
You worked
pursuits.
really hard. You
We
didn't.
worked really hard, yeah.
No.
And really nice alignment with federal priorities. I mean, there's like just a lot of support for
Yes.
this kind of stuff. So-
Yeah.
So to the question, I mean, what can we do?
Yes.
We bring our communities into these
Yes.
conversations. Maybe if we focus on the safety can parking, you know, then how do we make sure that we're bringing the most diverse voices into those opportunities that the city's putting out?
Okay.
In our various capacities. And that's just, I feel like that's a to-do that's pretty straightforward, right?
Great.
Do you want to jump into safety with that wonderful segue?
Yeah.
Does that? You don't even necessarily have to. It seems like the one to-do that we have is utilize our networks and our voices and our contacts. And then, you know, we will be putting a special emphasis on these three, safety, parking, and CAN.
Makes sense to me.
Our work here is done. Okay. So put just safety around connection to the, connection to everything else. There's RTD, bus rapid transit, sidewalk repairs, which might,
I could go under safety.
yeah, that could go to, ADA accessibility.
Okay.
And then this.
Yeah, that's kind of part of our TV.
Okay, that's, yeah.
Well, TOD.
Oh, yeah, TOD.
Our TOD that has OD.
Yeah.
Our OD.
So I have a note for myself for next week's agenda setting meeting in June. Tab meeting, to ask, you know, can we get an update or a rundown on those changes in state law? Is that gonna be too early? At least understand what happened?
Yeah, we might want to wait a little bit because we want to get I think it would be great to have, Valerie mentioned like having Carl come maybe and giving, and then
That's a good idea.
that gives also Janet and I some time to think about what,
Yeah,
just implications there are.
yeah, I was curious.
Yeah, but we can talk about it, Jen,
Yeah.
and get it on a future month. And then maybe just what I'll say with some of, well, are you guys gonna talk a little bit more about these other buckets that you identified, or?
We're happy, we have 30 minutes.
Okay.
We can only forget ice
I
cream.
guess I would like to understand from staff, I mean, so this is something that's, you know, part of my work, the whole, I mean, RTD stuff, right? And our capacity to influence RTD and our capacity to advocate for the return of bus service to Boulder Chunk and that kind of stuff. And I think, you know, I'm curious about like, which hat to wear in those conversations.
Because I'm a Boulder Junction resident. And so much, I moved there specifically thinking, oh, man, the RTD thing, they're so great. And food didn't happen. And I'm like, I got in an argument with RTD about, well, because for me to come here, for example, I need to ride the hop to, I can go to Poetry, but if I do advocacy at the state capitol, I have to take the hop to the downtown station and then to Union Station.
Yeah.
And I used to live right over by the public library, so I could make it to downtown station. No problem, just in my power chair, but I don't have the option. And I've noticed this year has been very difficult to do advocacy at the Capitol because of the lack of transportation and they start session at 9 AM. So if you don't get to them before 9 AM, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
But when they withdrew the border junction, they took away a lot of my advocacy power.
Yeah.
That's a real
Wow.
important
Yeah,
point.
that is really important.
Can you educate me, because I know there were some buses that were cut during COVID, there used to be.
There used to be
junctions.
4.
Well,
So now they're all gone. There's no.
yeah,
there's no
before
service.
COVID, there was amazing coverage. And then we talked to new lady in Longmont, she like part of the Longmont City Council or something. She's like, don't ever expect to see that kind of coverage again. Cause RTD just doesn't have the funding. And like I said, it's that cycle, you know, they say we don't have funding because of lack of ridership, but riders say we won't ride because you're unreliable.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, they had the plan to build this border junction, and what I understand is, to me, it sounds like poor planning, because apparently the border junction station is not big enough to handle all the flat iron flaggers and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why they went and put their money back into the downtown station. But to me, I'm like, but why did you waste all the money on RTD station that you're just closing?
Well, this has, that example is hugely important to the state because now with the passage of 1313, I mean, there's, you know, it's an opening for more transit-oriented development, but if there's not
Yeah.
the reliability of transit service, like, you know, Broomfield is dealing with this as well, right? Lots of TOD with very little T, and it's a real problem. But, you know, I don't know, I need to, that's my professional sort of
And
transportation.
it's gonna get bad.
But what can we do about that?
Yeah, so I'll share some thoughts and then I can share some thoughts. So I think when I think about important areas that TAD can help, statewide transit funding is probably one of the areas. And there's gonna be a theme here because funding just as a whole is probably a priority area. I mean, it's certainly a priority area, I think, for city council. They have it identified for the long-term financial strategy as a work plan item this year, to start this year, citywide, and transportation certainly will be a part of that conversation. I think if I were a board member, I would be very interested in that work. And then on a state level, like when you think about transit, what you heard, Jennifer, from that was it a Longmont council member?
I heard they just roll, it was on a mobility for all of us.
Yeah, so
It was not much.
yeah, and that person's right. RTD does not have the funding to be able to provide the coverage that they used to provide across the district.
Yeah.
And it's nice that their CEO there's somebody in that seat that's finally willing to say, we don't have the money to do this and we're not going to do it anymore. We need to provide the best service that we can to a limited population, and y'all need to figure out how we're gonna serve the rest of this, constituency, and find more money to do that. And so this legislative cycle, there was statewide transit funding in the conversation. Ultimately, a bill did come out around statewide transit funding. I'm not sure of the details of what, I think it's very limited. I think it has a lot to do with FRP, with Front Range Passenger Rail. I don't know what's available at a local level for transit operations. Oftentimes you see transit funding come forward for capital projects. That's not helpful when it comes to providing transit service. You need operating dollars. But the reality of it is RTD may get back a route or two to Boulder Junction, but any other service that we want, and it would probably be regional, any other local connections will need to be locally funded, or they'll need to be funded by statewide transit money that flows to local agencies to be able to provide that funding. For whatever reason, nobody's coming out and saying that super clearly yet, but that is the reality, right? Like RTD they have said they'll never restore pre-COVID levels. I think the majority it'll get to is like 85%. And that's per their system optimization.
Yeah, it's in
plan,
two
so-
rounds, F4 and F6.
And that's just the reality of it. So when you think about your role as board members, there is probably a role to be taking in those statewide, the next legislative session is potentially an opportunity where, and this is where it's like, maybe a big ask, but Tad could be talking to other city transportation, elected officials about why this is an important issue for our region and trying to get coalitions to go to, the state to get more funding for transit. But those are like, to me, the like big picture opportunities around when, the very tactical thing is there's no transit service at Boulder Junction. Well, how do we get there, right? It's just big, like it's a big issue that's not going to be solved just by telling RTD to provide a bus service because they're not going to do it, because they don't have the funding to do it. So, and then, I think the same applies at a more local level around just our local transportation funding. And there's an opportunity, I think, for the board to get involved there, because council's doing that work, it's on their priority list.
So Standing Cats at Coburg
Yes.
is putting together a
Yeah.
coalition.
Mhm.
Do
Yep.
you support our engagement with that?
Yeah, I think that's probably an area where we would want to run the details by, like, is there an individual capacity that board members can get involved? Or is that, something that we would want to say the board as a whole is being represented there? I think that would be one we'd want to run the details by Janet to see what would be most appropriate.
Okay, yeah, and I think I'd like to get some more full information
Yeah,
on
sure.
exactly the scope of that.
Yeah.
So is the hop the only bus at Boulder Junction?
And it doesn't
It's not
actually go into Boulder Junction, it just.
Yeah.
on the- Yeah.
But that is all confusing. I'm like, where do I get, it always told me on app to go to Board Junction, and I'm like,
It's on the
Where?
30th, right?
There's no-
yeah. And I'm like,
There's no buses in.
No, but the bus day is going to come to the summer to go to.
In the light rail someday.
Commuter rail.
Commuter rail.
Or waterways. The money crunch is back here at this department. Is there anything we can do to help this department get more money dollars in the next budgeting cycle?
I think it's the citywide, long-term financial strategy is the place to be thinking about just funding for the city and transportation funding being a part of that.
There's a lot of.
Well, with this, really, we just have ADA accessibility, which in some ways it touches all the work
Yeah.
across, but I don't know if there was anything on specific that you wanted to talk about it. They just discuss it.
So, I think we touched on it a little bit already, Valerie and Natalie, but can you just reaffirm like how ADA considerations are folded into all of the redevelopment and why?
Yeah, and I think.
When do we go back and fix the curb cuts versus just stick with new development versus retrofit stuff?
Yeah, should we have Garrett pop up for this one?
Yeah, I
If
think
you want, if he's around.
it is online. Let's see.
He spoke a little bit to this at the last meeting with, I think, maybe the CAP, but we can.
Have you guys seen the work they've done on Moorhead? Cause that.
Yes, I
that's
have.
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, as we are seeing if Garrett's available, I think Trini brings up a really great point that the pavement management program is not just about the roadway surface curb to curb. Whenever we go through and keep the roadway in a state of good repair, we're also looking at curb and gutter, we're looking at curb ramps, we're looking at that. So it's a mechanism that we have as a department to address a lot of outdated infrastructure in the city.
And we have Garrett online.
Yes, so I'm here and I'm guilty of multitasking, so I will ask for you to restate the question.
You were playing solitaire, weren't you?
He wishes.
So the question was, can you just remind us and recap, because Jen has put sort of ADA considerations as a potential priority area for TAB. Can you just remind us how ADA accessibility and compliance kind of fits in with all of the any given project or any given sort of process as we're moving through the city and changing things.
Right, and so to clarify, you're talking about ADA from a physical infrastructure perspective, because we are learning and continuing to develop our knowledge and understanding of what it means to be compliant with ADA across the entire department, right? So you're just talking about physical infrastructure.
Correct.
Okay, yes, so I think that I heard that there was a response from Valerie that in the context of the pavement management program, we go and as part of that, upgrade all of the curb ramps that are adjacent to all the paving work. And I would love to tell you it's because we are progressive as a community, but that's actually, it's a federal requirement. Every city, everywhere, once that's falls into the term of what the feds call an alteration to the street. So when you're crack sealing or chip sealing, that does not classify as an alteration, but when you're overlaying or repaving, that classifies as an alteration, which then triggers the need to upgrade all the existing infrastructure to become ADA compliant. So the pavement management program does that. Then we also have our multi-use path maintenance programs that are also looking to upgrade existing path systems to be compliant with ADA regulation, as well as the sidewalk repair program. And I spoke to that at our CIP meeting the other day. We have two different programs there, actually three. One's sort of reactive, where we work with property owners around the city. The other is the one that I talked about that is woefully underfunded, where it's taking us 4 years to do a single area. That's our more proactive program. And then we have the missing links, which was the reason we were able to go put in the sidewalk missing link section there at 26th and 27th Spruce last month. So those programs are all looking to be compliant with the ADA. And then, of course, anytime we do a standalone capital project, anything inside the footprint of that project is considered an alteration. And so that also is going to upgrade the ADA, the facilities to be compliant with ADA. And then whenever there's private development also occurring outside the context of the capital improvement program, the folks who are responsible for the development in public streets and right-of-way also have an obligation to upgrade facilities to ADA standards.
Now, how does construction an ADA requirement, how, cause a lot of, when I see a 30 Pearl where I live, often the construction violates the ADA standards. And I'm like, but whose job is that? No.
Whose job is it to enforce the ADA standards during construction?
Yeah.
So that will vary from project to project. When it's a capital project happening in transportation, we have technicians, both in the capital projects team as well as the operations team, whose duty it is to make sure that both the permanent as well as the detour routes that are being provided are ADA accessible. On the private development projects, it's the role of the right-of-way inspectors to perform that role. And they have a tougher time because they have so many projects that they have to keep an eye on. And so the work that you've been seeing at 30th and Pearl is a private development project where it's more challenging for them to be able to keep up. But that is the responsibility of the city right-of-way inspector to make sure they're keeping the temporary work zone detours for pedestrians and cyclists in place.
Thank you. I didn't know fences that construction groups use often are their biggest violation.
Yeah,
because
walking.
they block your sidewalk and like, I live right on the corner, so I'm like home base for the construction. So I listen to beeping from 7:30 AM till 5. Saturday to Friday, the only day of is Sunday.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah, and we often, as Garrett said, the right-of-way team, there's a lot of development happening out there. And the right-of-way team is obviously limited in staffing resources. And so a lot of that is reactionary, right? When there's a violation occurring, somebody usually reports that. Oftentimes Sue is my eyes out on the road and she'll call me or text me and be like, there's a problem, like, and our right-of-way team usually addresses it very quickly. My experience with them is they're always very responsive. It's just a matter of knowing that it's happening because we don't have our eyes out there all the time. So it's, always feel welcome to pass those along.
Okay, right away, can you make sure I really spoke?
Yeah, so the inquirable there, you can call Meredith, you can call me, you can use our Inquire Boulder system. Yeah.
Thank you.
A million years ago, members of TAB got fancy little name tags, brass thingies with the magnet backing, and in terms of me remembering like when you're on duty and off, it's actually really helpful. So can I make a formal request? I have one, but can we get one for the rest of our TAB members?
Yes.
Please?
Thank you. I got to apologize because I got nameplates last
Oh,
year
yeah,
that,
that we never use.
yeah. I didn't get them yet.
Meredith, do you have one for me? Does one exist?
I think we have to order the ones.
We need to order the tabs.
Order the name plate,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back in.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess we can talk about that maybe before we break. I don't know how you're timing about in-person meetings. We kind of took a temperature on this last year
Yeah.
with the board and it seemed like everyone was kind of sticking what we've been doing with remote every month. We're open to other options if that's the desire of TAB.
The other option would be hybrid. I understand you're not allowed to have.
That's correct. It would be hybrid.
Ram, for instance, has been doing water resources advisory report that our business group also supports it. They meet over by Alpine Balsam
Oh, okay.
monthly.
Yeah.
But they're
hybrid.
Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
I would suggest that for the time being, we remain hybrid just because of the travel that
Yeah.
some people maybe have for the summer and so forth.
Well, we can remain remote. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
100%
sorry.
remote? Yeah.
Sorry.
Between
I
child
know
care
we're
and
done,
job.
yeah, that's the challenge. Like Monday nights are hard for me.
Yeah.
I could go anywhere on Wednesday and Thursday
Yeah.
nights, but not Monday nights.
And it's easier for you to not have to travel.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean, for disability community and low income, it's especially important to have a virtual option to get their voices.
Well, just sell me to your place.
Well, the But
All right, good to know.
It was delightful to see you here today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I
Thank
do
you.
love
I was not
doing
expecting to be doing it the whole time, so this is very handy, very useful. We had questions outside of our normal.
Yeah, thank you
Designated
guys so
time
much for being here the whole time. This is.
Thank you today. Yeah.
So that we could do that with, because that was part of the concluding meeting of kind of a summary, but also any gratitudes that we want to share for just today.
I am very impressed by all the different options. People online, but we're still having a good conversation, I think, and I think that's great. to see.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for your
Yeah,
facilitation.
and actually, thank you so much for your facilitation. I enjoyed this retreat.
Honor. That is an honor.
That's what for all of us.
Tila said this was the best retreat ever.
We gotta frame that.
It was very productive.
It was,
Yeah.
it was very productive.
Yeah.
I just appreciate you all taking the time, being here, being engaged and attentive the whole time, and thank you for what you do. It's important work.
Thank you too. And in that note, I'm really grateful to live here and this community and the team and everybody, because when you go out of this our little culture bubble, you realize that not everybody's as lucky. And so, yeah, it's important to really validate people's work.
I really appreciate your sunshine presentation, because I attended the Denver one and the Colorado Labor Department, because I'm on the Direct Care Worker Stabilization Board. And yours was so much more understandable.
Yeah. Awesome. I am grateful for your openness to my facilitation style, because it's sort of interrupting your own dynamics. So I'm grateful, and that's what I get to do for the work that I do. I interrupt spaces, especially institutions and then systems. Because that's how we move things forward. So just like Teresa said, thank you for the way you serve. Thank you for keeping us accountable, keeping the city accountable, because that serves our communities, right? And often our communities that are often not seen or heard from. So appreciate you. I think there's one more cookie. Just in that box, you would feel like I could use some little dessert. I realized I didn't tell you that before. Can we take a picture?
We can make a
It's like once in a lifetime. Us in person.
And thank you to staff.
Yeah, thank you.
I feel like that was like the silent ninjas. I'll take a.
If you like come over here, we can be on that side.
Spin it up.
Yeah, I'm not, freaking home. I'm ready to go again.
Yeah. That's okay. Let's stop it.
They can get behind us. Okay.